Chapter 96. After the Falling Star Pavilion disciple finished speaking, he turned around and led Meng Qi and the rest into Falling Star Valley. Meng Qi had stayed in Falling Star City for many days, but it was his first time here. As the top sect in the east border, Falling Star Valley was located in a mountain range. There was a straight path paved with bluestone that led from the entrance of the valley to the inside of the valley. There were tall mountains on both sides, and the trees on the mountain walls were lush. It looked rather imposing. After the disciple led the group for a while and turned a corner, Meng Qi and the rest suddenly felt that their eyes were wide open. The inside of the valley was many times wider than when they stood at the entrance of the valley. A magnificent building was built against the mountain. That was the main hall of the Falling Star Pavilion. There were 7 mountains on both sides, and there were some pavilions and towers on the mountains. Those should be the residences of the Falling Star Pavilion disciples. Half of the mountain was surrounded by clouds, and it looked rather divine. Other than that, there was another path on both sides of the main hall that led to the back of the mountain. As the top sect in the east border, the Falling Star Pavilion disciples naturally had many places to cultivate. Meng Qi had heard Pei Mufeng mention before that there were 2 blessed grotto heavens with rich spirit energy in the back of the Falling Star Pavilion. The treasures in the blessed grotto heavens had been taken away, and there was a spirit vein in each of the grotto heavens with endless spirit energy. It was the most suitable place for cultivation. This was something that Meng Qi's Cool Breeze Valley did not have. It was also one of the reasons why the large sects had so many cultivators coming in. This way, please. The Falling Star Pavilion disciple turned around and said to Meng Qi and the rest. He then led them to a side hall of the main hall. Please wait for a moment. Soon, other disciples brought tea and snacks. The disciple poured tea for everyone one by one. The aroma of the tea immediately wafted into their nostrils. It refreshed their hearts and made them forget everything. It smells so good. Sikong Xing picked up the teacup and smelled it. What tea is this? This is our sect's sword tea, the disciple explained with a smile. On the cliff behind the Falling Star Pavilion's mountain, there are a few tea trees that are 5,000 to 6,000 years old. He paused for a moment before continuing. Ever since the generation of our old ancestor, there have been disciples practicing the sword at the back of the mountain. The sword qi ran rampant day and night, but those tea trees stubbornly survived. Not only did it survive, but under the nourishment of the sword qi, the tea leaves also took the shape of small swords. Hey! Sikong Xing was extremely curious and looked at the teapot in the other party's hand. The disciple smiled and lifted the lid of the teapot in his hand, allowing Sikong Xing to see what was inside. As expected, Sikong Xing blinked and pulled Meng Qi's arm to show her. Look at these tea leaves. This is the first time I've seen such tea leaves. They look like small swords. Interesting. Not only are the tea leaves shaped like small swords, but they also contain 30% spirit qi and 30% sword qi. If the disciples drank this sword tea, their cultivation speed would be slightly faster. Moreover, the tea was cool and refreshing. Although it tasted a little bitter, the aftertaste was sweet and delicious. Our sword tea is extremely famous in the 4 realms. Do you sell it? Sikong Xing took another small sip. Indeed, it tasted slightly bitter, but the aftertaste was sweet. The tea's fragrance lingered, warming her from the tip of her tongue to her chest. There was no doubt that it contained spirit qi. The production of this sword tea is extremely low. It can only be picked once every 10 years, and there are only a dozen jars each time. The Falling Star Pavilion disciple smiled and said, even among the sect's disciples, not all of them can drink it. Only those who have made great contributions or accumulated enough sect contribution points can exchange for it. I see. Sikong Xing's disappointment was written all over her face. Her father was a famous tycoon in the demon realm's Heaven Demon Crimson Fox clan. She had never worried about spirit stones. When she saw something she liked, she could not help but want to buy it. However, the sect master has instructed us. The disciple smiled again. Daoist Meng is an honored guest of the sect. We have already prepared some gifts for all of you, including this sword tea. Thank you so much. Sikong Xing was elated. She turned to Meng Qi and asked, Meng Qi, did you and Pavilion Master Pei know each other in the past? We've met once before, Yi Zichen replied. Meng Qi was actually quite surprised. In her previous life, she had a good relationship with Pei Mufeng. When the two of them were together, the feeling of appreciation and care for each other was quite good. However, in this life, if she remembered correctly, the first time she met Pei Mufeng was at Heavens Beyond. He left the Heaven-class auction house early like her and even invited her to Heavens Beyond for a drink, but she rejected. Then, they met again at Descending Star City. The disciple did not seem surprised. He cupped his hands and bowed to Meng Qi again. Daoist Meng, the sect master wants to meet you alone. Is it convenient? Yes. Meng Qi nodded and stood up. Before the others could react, Su Junmo stood up as well. He had a headache now. He had not settled Ji Wujiang yet. Why did Pei Mufeng appear now? How could the sect master be all right? I'll go with you, Su Junmo said without hesitation. It's all right. Meng Qi smiled at him. I trust you, Pavilion Master Pei. It was not a matter of trust, all right? Su Junmo was full of complaints. He did not know where to start. But, please lead the way. Meng Qi smiled at him and said to the Descending Star Pavilion disciple, thank you. The disciple instructed the other Descending Star Pavilion disciples in the side hall and led Meng Qi out of the hall. Daoist Meng, this way please. He waved at the path on the right of the hall and invited Meng Qi to go first. This path leads to the Star Lake. The sect master is waiting for you at the Star Lake. He explained, I can't enter without permission. I'll wait for you here. Please. Thank you. Meng Qi returned the gesture. She walked on the path that led to the Star Lake. She had heard Pei Mufeng mention this before. It was a secret place in the Descending Star Pavilion. It was similar to the Cool Breeze Valley's cold pond. The Star Lake could absorb the power of the stars. The cultivators of the 3,000 worlds could not directly use the spiritual energy in the power of the stars. However, the water of the Star Lake had a magical effect. It could turn the spiritual energy that could not be used by cultivators into spiritual energy that could be used by everyone. This was equivalent to another blessed place in the Descending Star Pavilion. The spirit chi in the starlight was always purer than the spirit chi in the 3,000 worlds. Cultivating here could yield twice the results with half the effort. The Star Lake transformed the spirit chi in the starlight very slowly. It could only allow people to cultivate for 3 days every year. Therefore, the Descending Star Pavilion had always used it to reward disciples who had made great contributions. Even the Pavilion Master could not come here at any time. The Star Lake was not far away. Meng Qi walked for a while and turned a corner. From afar, she could see a small lake that looked like the purest and most transparent jade. The surroundings were surrounded by tall mountains that blocked the bright sunlight. However, there were specks of stars in the lake as if there were stars twinkling in it. The Pavilion Master of the Descending Star Pavilion, Pei Mufeng, was standing by the lake. His back was facing Meng Qi. His tall and slender body looked like a sharp sword that had yet to be unsheathed. Tall and straight, sharp. Meng Qi also knew that once Pei Mufeng's sword was unsheathed, it would be peerless. She walked a few steps quickly. Pei Mufeng heard the footsteps and turned his head. Meng Qi. He stood still and waited for Meng Qi to walk over. Have you rested well? Yes. That day, I had been going to stop that Ji Wujiang. Pei Mufeng did not exchange pleasantries with her and said directly, he used a formation to trap me at the gates of the apricot forest. Yes. Meng Qi nodded again. Ji Wujiang had mentioned this matter to him before. His tone was disdainful, his face full of disdain. It was all to show off the power of formation cultivators. Later, when I saw how strong he was in the trial boundary, I knew that he had been merciful to me. Pei Mufeng said openly, Ji Wujiang is very strong. A Xiozhi that can use formations to fight. I fear that even the other weapon Xiao of the 4 Jie cannot do it. Yes. Meng Qi was not surprised that Pei Mufeng would say this. He was a very pure person who spent all his thoughts on the path of the sword. Ji Wujiang's strength was undeniable. Even if he was trapped, he was still trapped. There was nothing that could not be said. Ji Wujiang seems to have said that he wants to take you as a disciple. Pei Mufeng was slightly uncertain. Yes. Meng Qi did not know how to explain this. Fortunately, Pei Mufeng did not pursue the matter and said, "Do you have a sect now?" Meng Qi shook his head. Ji Wujiang is very strong. He can protect you now. Before you. Pei Mufeng's Adam's apple bobbed. He paused and then continued, "I see that he has no ill intentions towards you. In the last battle in the trial boundary, he protected you very well. Why don't you consider his proposal?" Meng Qi tilted his head in surprise and looked at Pei Mufeng. Or. Pei Mufeng spread his hand. There was a small and exquisite sword-shaped jade medal in his palm. The words "Star Fall" were carved on the hilt. He did not finish his sentence, but Meng Qi already understood what he meant. Pei Mufeng did not seem to want to finish his sentence. He seemed to think that Meng Qi should understand what he meant. Joining the Starfall Pavilion is not a bad choice, but I'm going to the Starfall Sea soon and will not return for 10 years. He said, "You should be strong enough after 10 years. The most important thing is that these few years, Pei Mufeng was a little troubled. He frowned slightly. Meng Qi, what do you plan to do? Meng Qi, actually, Ji Wujiang is not the best choice. He does things his own way and has offended many people. Pei Mufeng said, just this medical cultivator conference alone, I'm afraid that all the major medical cultivator sects in the 4 realms hate him to the core. He added, but it's always good to have his protection for 5 years. Wait. Meng Qi finally understood. Pei Mufeng was worried about his safety, so he wanted to make plans for her before he left for the Starfall Sea. Ranweena. Net Meng Qi could not help but laugh. Should it be said that they were really close friends? She had been busy all night, worrying about Pei Mufeng's safety in the Starfall Sea. He was also thinking about her. Don't worry. Meng Qi said, I have my own plans. As she spoke, she took out the brocade pouch that contained the pills she had refined from her storage bag and handed it to Pei Mufeng. This is for you. Thank you. Pei Mufeng took the brocade pouch and sent his spiritual energy into it. This is. It was because he had just broken through and his realm was not stable that he was injured by strange beasts in the Fallen Star Sea. She didn't expect that he was already a spirit-severing stage cultivator now. So powerful. Meng Qi murmured. As for the sword spirit at the perfection of level 6, it was a method used by sword cultivators to distinguish their strength. It was roughly equivalent to a level 6 medical cultivator. Pei Mufeng was able to cultivate a level 6 sword spirit at his age. Looking at the history of sword cultivators for nearly 1,000 years, he should be second to none. He was really so powerful. Compared to him, she was really too weak. Not to mention that she had just entered the Golden Core stage, her medical skills were also far from his. Yun Qingyang seemed to snort softly. Meng Qi didn't hear clearly and couldn't help but ask, Qingyan's Henjin? So now that he has entered the Fallen Star Sea, as long as he doesn't overestimate himself and go deep into the center, he won't die there, Yun Qingyang said. Understood. Meng Qi was enlightened. She instantly beamed, and even her eyes became sparkling. Thank you, Qingyan's Henjin, for your explanation. I'm relieved now. So Senior Yun saw that she was worried, so she specially showed up to tell her this. Senior was really too kind. Don't call me Senior. Yun Qingyang gritted her teeth and said almost word by word. Oh, Meng Qi quickly reached out and covered her mouth. In fact, she didn't say it out loud at all. It was just a subconscious action. Meng Qi instantly understood. So every time Senior appeared. Stop calling me that. Yun Qingyang interrupted her thoughts again. Oh. Meng Qi knocked her head in annoyance and quickly said, I know I was wrong. Qingyan's Henjin, I won't call you Senior Yun wrong this time. Yun Qingyang, thank you, Qingyan's Henjin. Meng Qi asked curiously, how did you know what I was thinking? I could when I was talking to you. Yun Qingyang didn't explain much. In fact, doing this would consume a lot of energy for him. However, it just so happened that the beast house was in Meng Qi's storage bag, so he could do it with her as a medium. Meng Qi nodded obediently and didn't ask any more questions. This Star Lake. Yun Qingyang pondered for a moment and said lightly, "Walk to the lakeside." "Okay." Meng Qi hesitated for a moment, but still walked to the lakeside as she was told. She looked down at the lake water. The water was so clear that she could even see the patterns on the stones at the bottom of the lake. The starlight was like gold, flickering in the lake water. The light was gentle, and it was more like a rich and pure concentration of spiritual energy, so it wasn't dazzling. "Can you see anything?" Yun Qingyang asked. "This lake water seems to be able to absorb the spiritual energy in the starlight," Meng Qi said. "The bottom of the lake," Yun Qingyang reminded her. "And the surroundings of the star lake. Look carefully." "Okay." Meng Qi looked around the star lake. This time, with Yun Qingyang's instructions, she looked very carefully and didn't even miss a single blade of grass or tree by the lake. She also looked at the stones piled up by the lake, big and small, high and low. "Ah." Meng Qi's gaze returned to the bottom of the lake, and she suddenly exclaimed softly, "This is..." Before she could finish speaking, the surface of the lake suddenly split open with a splash. A black figure emerged from the lake water and swept through the air as light as a cloud before landing steadily in front of Meng Qi. "Ji Wujiang?" Meng Qi blurted out and looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. Ji Wujiang shook off the lake water on his body until the last bit of starlight was absorbed into his body. Then, he cast a spell and dried his clothes. "Meng Qi." The black-robed man looked up at Meng Qi. "We meet again. Why are you here?" Meng Qi found it unbelievable. "Pavilion Master Pei, he invited me here." Ji Wujiang curled his lips. "That day, I was the first to leave the barrier of the competition. As expected, those old men from the Medical Cultivation Dharma Assembly gathered people to ambush me outside. They were so ruthless. TSK, 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 he pursed his lips in disdain. They don't have the demeanor of a benevolent medical cultivator at all. I've said before that when necessary, those old men are very ruthless. They will kill you as well. When that time comes, they just have to say that they killed the wrong person and accidentally. They can even push all the blame onto me in the chaos." Meng Qi, she was already used to Ji Wujiang. Anyway, he would always mock her. "And then?" she asked, "Why are you in Starfall Valley?" "The person who attacked me first was that guy. I trapped him before, Pei Mufeng from the Starfall Pavilion," Ji Wujiang said. "However, I gave him a few beauties that day. He should be touched. Although he charged very quickly and attacked quickly with his sword, I could tell at a glance that this guy had no intention of hurting me. Instead, he used his sword qi to open a gap for me and let me rush out of the apricot forest." Ji Wujiang added, "At least he's sensible." Meng Qi was speechless. "It was also him. When we were fighting, he softly told me that there was a star lake here and that I could come here to recuperate after I left," Ji Wujiang said again. He turned to look at the starry star lake. "You don't say. This guy has sharp eyes. He knew that the star lake would be good for my injuries." Meng Qi's heart suddenly moved. She subconsciously blurted out, "Your spiritual ocean was torn apart by the barrier of the three realms?" "Hey!" Ji Wujiang turned to look at Meng Qi. "You're quite knowledgeable." Meng Qi did not say anything. Her mind spun as countless thoughts flashed through her mind. Meng Qi had started to read the book that Elder Lin Yang had left in her spiritual ocean. The moment Ji Wujiang had said to recuperate, she had suddenly thought of the other's spiritual ocean that had looked like it was about to fall apart. She had speculated how the other had been wounded. At the start, she had thought that he had been wounded by an even stronger Xiuzhi. Then she thought of the terrifying sea of Mo energy in the barrier of the great competition. Meng Qi had thought that the person who had wounded Ji Wujiang might have been a powerful Mo Xiu. She had just seen in Lin Yang's medical notes that while the three realms had existed since the ancient era, the barrier between the three realms had been formed naturally through cracks in space. Tens of thousands of years ago, the three realms had not been as clearly divided as they were now. Cracks would occasionally appear in the barrier, but those cracks would often change positions. If a Xiuzhi was careless and was wounded by the cracks in the barrier, it might not look like anything on the outside, but that Xiuzhi's spiritual ocean would be seriously wounded. In serious cases, the spiritual ocean would collapse and completely explode. Then medicine would be useless and could not be saved. But if one was wounded by the barrier, and the spiritual ocean had not completely collapsed, starlight could be used to repair the cracks in the spiritual ocean. The so-called starlight is a mysterious treasure that only exists in the demon realm. Meng Qi had not even seen records of it in the books of the 3,000 worlds. According to Elder Lin Yang's description, it was stardust that had fallen from stars. It was obtained by the sky yarrow of the yarrow world who were skilled in communicating with the power of stars. They could slowly refine the stardust and finally obtain the starlight. The starlight contained the purest stardust power. Then this star lake, Meng Qi's gaze flashed slightly. She suddenly became excited. Hey! Ji Wujiang waved a hand in front of her. What are you thinking about? You are so lost in thought. You are in this star lake. Meng Qi turned to look at Ji Wujiang and asked word by word, repairing your spiritual ocean? Yes. Ji Wujiang nodded without hesitation. Meng Qi exhaled softly, and her gaze quickly swept across the entire star lake. There is a large array in this star lake, she said. Ji Wujiang, he could also see that. Not only could he see that there was an array here, but he could also see what this array was. But it didn't make sense. This array was F*King, the Great Star Array. Meng Qi said. Ji Wujiang. He suddenly became nervous. You know that this is the Great Star Array? Yes. Meng Qi tilted her head slightly. But it's a little different from what I learned. At that moment, Ji Wujiang really wanted to curse. Even someone as calm as him felt that it was unbelievable. That was the Great Star Array. Even if Meng Qi really became his disciple and he took her in as a disciple, he would never teach her the Great Star Array. There was no other reason. This was an array that could only be taught to one's own people. Even he back then, he even taught her the Great Star Array. Meng Qi even said that she only wanted to become that person's disciple. That respectful tone, Ji Wujiang suddenly wanted to laugh out loud. Although he didn't know who that unlucky guy was, as long as he thought about how that guy, who didn't lose to him in terms of arrays, was humiliated by Meng Qi. I want you to be my wife, but you only want to be my disciple. Awesome. It was really super awesome. He was so happy. Ji Wujiang frowned slightly, barely suppressing his laughter, and turned to look at Meng Qi. The green-robed girl stood by the star lake with a serious expression. Her eyes were serious and focused, and there was even a hint of struggle. Meng Qi, Ji Wujiang said, then, what is the Great Star Array that you learned like? Chapter 97. Meng Qi glanced at Ji Wujiang. Is there anything different about the Great Star Formation? Of course. Ji Wujiang said matter-of-factly, do you know how the Great Star Formation came about? I don't know. Meng Qi replied casually. Her gaze was focused on the star lake in front of her. The specks of starlight in the lake seemed to be dimmer than before. If Ji Wujiang could be treated here, did that mean that little Qi could be treated too? In addition to the previous external injuries, little Qi's more serious internal injuries were actually more serious. Meng Qi was at her wit's end because she had never heard of starlight before. But now, Meng Qi, Ji Wujiang raised his voice. Huh? Meng Qi came back to her senses. Sorry, what were you saying just now? I was a little distracted. I know you're distracted. I said. Ji Wujiang flicked his finger, and a branch appeared in his hand. Meng Qi looked up at his hand that was holding the branch. The man in black looked much more energetic than before. Even the sickly paleness on his face didn't seem so obvious, and his thin lips even had a faint color. Was the star lake so useful? She suddenly felt a little tempted. Hey! Ji Wujiang lifted the branch and waved it in front of Meng Qi's eyes. I'm talking to you. Look at the ground. Oh! Meng Qi looked at the ground as she was told. Her eyebrows twitched. This is, what the other party drew on the ground was a very small corner of a formation. A very small part of the Great Star Formation. Ji Wujiang said, you don't recognize it. Oh! Meng Qi shook her head. Does the Great Star Formation also have many variations? Ji Wujiang, right now, He really wanted to find the guy who taught Meng Qi the Great Star Formation and shake his head to see how much water there was in his brain. With such a fine talent in front of him, what kind of nonsense was he teaching? You! Ji Wujiang lost his temper. Looking at Meng Qi's clear black and white eyes, he felt helpless. Don't you know how the Great Star Formation came about? Passed down from ancient times? Meng Qi asked tentatively. Inheritance, my ass, Ji Wujiang said angrily. He stretched out his leg and quickly wiped away the previous array before drawing another one. What about this one? No. Meng Qi shook his head. This. Ji Wujiang quickly drew a new corner of the array. Meng Qi shook his head. Ji Wujiang continued to draw. Meng Qi still shook his head. He gritted his teeth and tried more than 10 types of Meng Qi in one breath, but he had never seen any of them before. In the end, she sighed and said, so there are so many types of great star arrays. Ji Wujiang snorted lightly and threw down the branch with his arms crossed in front of his chest. The matter was clear. Great star arrays were the foundation of the Sky Yarrow clan. Sky Yarrow were stronger than normal Yarrow Shio because of this. They did not need to work hard to obtain Ling energy like the Shouja of the 3000 worlds. Because from birth, they had star arrays inside their bodies and could automatically absorb the Ling energy in starlight to cultivate. All the clans of the Sky Yarrow had a rule that the star arrays of the clan were forbidden from being leaked. Of course, this did not stop those who wanted to explore. From the ancient times until now, there were still many star arrays of the Sky Yarrow clans that were known to outsiders. However, there were some exceptions. Those were the royal clans of the Sky Yarrow. Ji Wujiang could be considered very knowledgeable in the area of formations. He took a deep breath and turned to look silently at Meng Qi. It seemed that the background of the person behind the other was even higher than he had imagined. Meng Qi. Ji Wujiang's expression was solemn. If the person who taught you the array comes to you again, Meng Qi's eyes lit up. Come to me again? Ji Wujiang. He shut his mouth and did not bother to say anything else. Why didn't he have the luck to meet Meng Qi first? Alright, let's continue talking about this star lake. Ji Wujiang said, since you can see that there is a star array here. By the way, he paused for a moment before continuing, let me correct you. Not all star arrays can be called great arrays. Only a few very special ones can be called great star arrays. Oh. Meng Qi nodded. This is a star array. The lake water is rather special. There must be something else at the bottom of the lake. It could be. Ji Wujiang narrowed his eyes. Stardust. Meng Qi finished the sentence. You know about stardust? Ji Wujiang was a little surprised. You know a lot, Meng Qi. I've heard of it, Meng Qi said calmly. Stardust can be used to refine starlight and repair the cracks in the spirit sea. So there should be stardust in the star lake. I just don't know what the shape of this stardust is. This is unique to the demon realm. Ji Wujiang explained, when stars fall, occasionally fragments and remains will fall into the demon realm and be obtained by the heavenly demons. Some heavenly demons can refine them into starlight. I see. Meng Qi nodded thoughtfully. During the refining process, you have to add spirit herbs and spirit flowers unique to the demon realm. Yes. Meng Qi lowered his head and pondered. He asked, is it spirit-devouring grass, nightless fruit, 5 spirit flower, and Taishen wood? Ji Wujiang. Did someone tell you how to refine starlight? I guessed, Meng Qi said lightly. To repair the cracks in the spirit sea, you have to use these spirit herbs and spirit flowers. She paused and then said, these are all rare treasures. As far as I know, 5 spirit flower and Taishen wood can only be found in the Starfall Sea in the 3000 worlds. That's right. Ji Wujiang nodded. You have to use these to refine stardust. Plus, hey. He glanced at Meng Qi. Keep guessing. Why aren't you guessing? What else do you want to add? Meng Qi took 2 steps forward, bent down, and scooped up a handful of water from the star lake. The water in the star lake in Starfall Valley is very special. She opened her hand and let the cold lake water leak through her fingers. There was a cold pond at the peak of the sect where I used to be. There was cold spring spirit dew in the pond. When a cultivator fails to pass the tribulation and falls into chi deviation, their realm will fall. That is the best thing to calm the mind. Meng Qi turned to look at the Star Lake. The Star Lake in Stardew Valley was not big. It was far less vast than the cold pond in Coolbreeze Valley. Although it was called a lake, it was actually less than 1 mile wide. There is a lot of cold spring spirit dew in this Star Lake. It is far more than the cold spring spirit dew in the cold pond in Coolbreeze Valley. Meng Qi said, "Is this the water used by the demon realm to refine stardust?" She turned to look at Ji Wujiang and asked, "Is that so?" "You." Ji Wujiang took a deep look at Meng Qi. "You know a lot." Meng Qi smiled sweetly. This was actually her guess. In order to save Su Junmo, Meng Qi and he spent a long time together. The talkative fox was a super gossipy person. There was nothing that he couldn't say. The romantic history of the big shots in the demon realm, the local customs of the demon realm, the special customs. Su Junmo had told Meng Qi many times. Anyway, her ears would suffer. Meng Qi simply sorted out these useful things. She didn't know about starlight. Even Su Junmo didn't mention it. But from the book that Lin Yang gave her, she saw the use of starlight. Then she heard Ji Wujiang say that there were heavenly demon descendants in the demon realm who could refine starlight. She remembered that Su Junmo had told her that there was a big lake in the demon realm made up of cold spring spirit dew. At that time, Meng Qi still yearned for it. That was cold spring spirit dew. A small porcelain bottle was very precious. There was a big lake full of it. Just imagining it made Meng Qi dazzled. There is a lot of cold spring spirit dew in this star lake, so I guess that a piece of stardust fell into the lake by chance many years ago. Then, Meng Qi looked around the star lake. A senior left a star formation here. Although she didn't recognize the star formations drawn by Ji Wujiang, she thought that after the formations were activated, they should be similar. So when she saw the spiritual energy flickering in the star lake, she guessed that there must be a star formation here. That's right. Ji Wujiang took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "That person used the star lake as the eye of the formation to attract the spiritual energy of the stars and use the cold spring spirit dew to refine the stardust." But there were no spiritual herbs and spiritual flowers like the 5-spirit flower, so he only left the spiritual energy in the starlight in this lake. It can help cultivators improve their cultivation speed, but it's still far from enough to repair the spiritual sea. Meng Qi's heart suddenly jumped a few beats. Ji Wujiang glanced at her. "Meng Qi, how about we find the stardust in this lake?" Meng Qi instantly felt her mouth go dry, and she was extremely tempted. She had never seen the legendary stardust. If it really existed here, she could find herbs like the spirit-devouring grass and the 5-spirit flower. In addition to the cold spring spirit dew, she also knew the star formation. Then she would have all the conditions to refine the stardust. How about it? Ji Wujiang chuckled softly. "If we find the stardust, we can definitely refine it into stardust." "No." Meng Qi swallowed with some difficulty. Her voice was slightly hoarse, but she still said firmly, "This is Starfall Valley. Pavilion Master Pei has already been very kind to let you recuperate here. We can't do such a thing. Ran, when are you just going to watch them waste God's gift like this?" Ji Wujiang sneered, "You actually used such a rare treasure of heaven and earth just to help the disciples of your sect cultivate. It can only improve their cultivation speed, but it's better than nothing. Only 3 people can come in a year, and each person gets 1 day. TSK. He shook his head disdainfully and said lazily, "It's probably because they can break through from the nascent soul stage to the spirit-severing stage in 20 years. With the help of this star lake, they can break through in 19 years and 350 days. Meng Qi, could Ji Wujiang be any more sharp-tongued? The stardust here is definitely not small. Let's find it, refine it into stardust, and give a part of it to Starfall Valley." Ji Wujiang added, "For them, it's much more cost-effective than saving 10 days of cultivation time, isn't it?" Meng Qi's heart skipped a beat again. She was stunned for a moment, but she still shook her head. This matter still needs the permission of the Starfall Valley's disciples. When the stardust falls, it falls into the star lake with the cold spring spirit dew, Ji Wujiang said, The person who left the star formation here is definitely not their people. Starfall Valley just happened to get this place by chance. What credit does it have? Meng-Chi, if you can really refine the stardust, you'll definitely save countless lives. When did you become so pedantic? Ji Wujiang raised his eyebrows and sneered. Everything in this world belongs to the capable. Idiots who only know how to waste natural resources don't deserve to have them. After he finished speaking, he flicked his finger, and the pitch-black narrow saber was held in his hand. I want to take it. If you don't want it, it's all mine. Wait. Meng-Chi closed her eyes and took out a porcelain bottle from her storage bag. She stuffed 2 stardust into her mouth. The stardust is divided into 3 portions. We each take 1 portion, and the rest will be given to the Starfall Pavilion. Okay. Ji Wujiang raised his eyebrows. I thought you'd be so pedantic that you wouldn't agree. Pavilion Master Pei is an upright person and treats people sincerely. Meng-Chi said, but you're right. She paused and said, I know of a special pill that will increase a cultivator's cultivation after taking it. The effect is about the same as the Star Lake now, but you can't take too many. At most, you can take one every 3 years. I'll make some for the Starfall Pavilion, and give them the pill recipe as well. Meng-Chi. Ji Wujiang stood by the Star Lake with his narrow saber. Do you know, Chem? Nothing. Ji Wujiang laughed softly. He already felt that Meng-Chi was a bit strange when they were in the boundary of the great competition. If he said she was kind and gentle, she could decisively propose the idea of ambushing and exterminating the soaring snake sect. If he said she was cruel and cold-hearted, she never took the opportunity to help him when he was injured and poisoned. Her first reaction was always to save him. And now again. Ji Wujiang originally thought that it would take a lot of effort to convince Meng-Chi. He didn't expect her to accept so quickly. This girl is really weird. Let's go, Ji Wujiang said. He gripped the pitch-black narrow saber in his hand. His slender body was like an agile fish as he dove into the Star Lake. Meng-Chi took out the black diving suit from her storage bag. She bought it at the Cloud Immortal Pavilion, and it was better than the one she used to have. Once she stuck it on her body, she could wear it directly over her green robe. It was very convenient to use. Moreover, it could withstand the attacks of sharp weapons. It was equivalent to an underwater soft armor. Meng-Chi also quickly jumped into the Star Lake. Although the Star Lake wasn't big, it would take a long time for a person to search slowly. Cultivators could breathe underwater without hindrance, especially since she had already formed her gold core. She quickly stood at the bottom of the lake and walked forward as if she was walking on flat ground. Ji Wujiang was about 50 feet away on her right. There was a lot of cold spring spirit dew in the Star Lake. Meng-Chi had 2 grains of spring warmth in her mouth. Even though she was wearing the diving suit, she still felt the coldness penetrating her bones. Fortunately, the bottom of the Star Lake was filled with soft white sand, so there was no danger. The 2 of them searched together, and their movements were quite fast. After less than an hour, they searched the entire bottom of the lake. Meng-Chi circled around and returned to the center of the lake. Ji Wujiang was already waiting there. She spread her hands, indicating that she hadn't found anything. Ji Wujiang also shrugged. When she had come to Starfall Valley, it had already been afternoon. After such a delay, the sky gradually darkened. Dusk started to cover the entire valley. Even the clear lake water seemed slightly dark. Meng-Chi reflexively raised her head to look at the sky. The earliest stars were already flashing in the sky. At this time, the sky wasn't completely dark yet, and the starlight was almost undetectable. Meng-Chi stilled and then suddenly pulled Ji Wujiang's arm, indicating for him to look at the sky with her. Ji Wujiang looked at the stars on the horizon and scolded himself for being too stupid. He narrowed his eyes. His Ling Si was damaged, causing his Ling energy to not exist, and his cultivation was unstable. But he was a true fused spirit Xiuzhe. His eyes were very good. That streak of starlight seemed to be there in Meng-Chi's eyes, but Ji Wujiang could see it clearly. He moved down along the streak of starlight. He suddenly turned and quickly walked to the left. Meng-Chi hurriedly followed. The bottom of the lake was filled with fine sand, and they all looked the same. There were no plants, nor any living creatures such as fish or prawns. Ji Woojeong walked to a place and stopped. He inserted the narrow knife in his hand into the fine sand. The sharpness of the narrow knife could cut iron into mud. Now that it had been inserted less than an inch, it couldn't go any deeper. Meng Qi half knelt and reached out to carefully brush away the fine sand around the narrow knife. The white sand was gradually brushed away, revealing the hard black thing underneath. It was neither iron nor stone, and there were specks of golden light mixed in it. Meng Qi raised her head and smiled at Ji Woojeong, then lowered her head and continued to brush away the fine sand. Soon, the entire black stardust was completely exposed. She reached out to take it, but she couldn't lift it at all. Ji Woojeong waved his hand at her, indicating for her to move aside and try it himself. That thing wasn't big, only the size of Meng Qi's 2 palms. There was also fine sand under the stardust, and it didn't seem to be fixed. Ji Woojeong reached out to hold the stardust and tried to lift it. His body suddenly staggered, and he almost fell out. Meng Qi, this stardust is so heavy. She looked at it with interest. If it weren't for the specks of golden light mixed in the middle, this stardust would really look a little inconspicuous. Ji Woojeong almost made a fool of himself in front of Meng Qi, and he instantly flew into a rage out of humiliation. He waved his hand again, indicating for Meng Qi to move aside. The narrow black knife quickly drew a small array on the ground, and then indicated for Meng Qi to give him the spirit stones. Meng Qi, she threw a few 8th grade spirit stones into the array, and the array suddenly shone brightly, rushing straight toward the stardust. Ji Woojeong took advantage of the opportunity to insert the narrow knife under the stardust and pry it open. The stardust finally shook a little. F***ck. Ji Woojeong cursed silently. He was about to continue drawing the array when Meng Qi's heart suddenly moved. She motioned for Ji Woojeong to not move, and then took out a feather from her storage bag. She bought that from the Immortal Cloud Pavilion. It was said to be a feather from a heavenly demon from the demon realm, and it could make anything as light as it. Meng Qi carefully placed the feather on the stardust, then reached out and held the stardust again. The thing that she couldn't move at all suddenly shook slightly. Meng Qi looked up and smiled at Ji Woojeong. It seemed to be useful. She simply held the stardust with both hands and slowly lifted it. The pitch-black stardust finally left the fine sand, and Meng Qi held it in her hands. She got it. She waved at Ji Woojeong, indicating that they could leave the Star Lake. Si Kongxing and the others should be waiting anxiously, and she should go back. Before Meng Qi could finish her thought, she saw Ji Woojeong's face suddenly become extremely frightened. He couldn't make a sound underwater, so Ji Woojeong held his narrow saber and directly pounced on Meng Qi. Before Meng Qi could react, she felt a huge suction force suddenly emerging from under her feet. At that moment, her reaction was extremely fast. She waved her left hand and put the stardust into her storage bag. In an instant, Meng Qi felt the world spin, and her entire body was sucked into a pitch-black void. The suction force was extremely terrifying, and Meng Qi didn't dare to resist at all. Moreover, she didn't have time to do anything else, so she could only go with the suction force. She could feel that she was going downwards. She didn't know how long the darkness lasted, but there was finally a glimmer of light in front of her eyes. Oh, the suction force came and went quickly, and Meng Qi was suddenly thrown out and fell heavily to the ground. She was a little dazed from the fall. After a while, Meng Qi gradually came back to her senses. She was thrown on a piece of soft grass, so she wasn't injured. However, in front of her was no longer the crystal-clear lake water of the Star Lake. Meng Qi slowly stood up and looked around. The night sky shrouded this place, and the stars in the sky were twinkling. As far as the eye could see, it looked like countless bright diamonds were inlaid in the dark blue night. She had never seen such a brilliant star before. Even the sky seemed to be much closer to her. Not far from her, there was a forest. It was difficult to see clearly in the dark, and the shadows of the trees were vague, and she couldn't see the end of it. On her left, there was a hill that wasn't very high. On her right, there was an extension of the grass under her feet, and she also couldn't see the end of it at a glance, as if it stretched directly to the distant horizon. Where was this place? It was quiet all around. Perhaps because it was night, there weren't even the sounds of birds or insects. There was only the occasional wind blowing, and the leaves rustled. Where was Ji Wujiang? Meng Qi looked around. Just now, she picked up the stardust, and then she was sent here by a huge suction force. What about Ji Wujiang? Was he okay? Thinking of this, Meng Qi reached out and touched her storage bag. The stardust was still there. She finally breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the moment she was sucked in, she reacted quickly and put away the stardust. So, was this place still in Starfall Valley? Meng Qi looked around and decided to go to the hill to see where she was sent to. She made up her mind and walked towards the small mountain. The hill wasn't far from her, and Meng Qi soon reached the foot of the hill. The hill wasn't steep, and Meng Qi stood at the top of the hill in a moment. This time, she could see a little further. In front of the hill, there was a huge lake. As the stars were too bright, Meng Qi could see the sparkling gold on the surface of the lake even in the dark. The bright stars were reflected in the lake, and it was as if there were stars shining in the lake. It was very beautiful. However, the lake was too big. Meng Qi couldn't see the end of it. It was like the sea. Where was this place? Meng Qi wasn't familiar with the surroundings of Starfall Valley, and she was even more confused now. She couldn't see the city in any direction. So, was she sent to a place further away from Starfall Valley? She looked up at the sky, trying to figure out the direction before making a decision. Meng Qi, third style of the Silver Moon Sword illustration. Yun Qingyan's voice suddenly sounded. Quick! Meng Qi didn't realize what was happening, but she reacted instinctively to Yun Qingyan's words. Before she could react, her body had already moved. The third style of the Silver Moon Sword illustration was to leap into the air and attack the enemy. Meng Qi was wearing a black diving suit, and her slim figure leaped into the air. Only then did she feel an extremely sharp gust of wind sweep past her feet. If she leaped a little later, she would have been injured by the gust of wind. Meng Qi exhaled quickly. Yun Qingyang would always appear when she was in danger or when she couldn't make up her mind. Just like in her previous life, he was the person who treated her the best and cared about her the most. Before Meng Qi landed, another gust of wind came from behind her. Evil creature! In the dark night, a man's clear voice suddenly sounded. This time, it wasn't just in Meng Qi's mind, but the black figure behind her. Meng Qi suddenly opened her eyes wide. The man in the white robe seemed to have descended from the sky. He stood in the air, raised his hand gently, and then pressed it down. His sleeves were blown by the night wind and swept across Meng Qi's face. Chapter 98. The mountain was still the same mountain as before. The place Meng Qi was standing on was still the soil she had climbed all the way up. Even the sky was dark, and the stars were shining brightly. All of this was obviously no different from before, but in Meng Qi's eyes, it was completely different. The sleeve supporting her back was removed, and Meng Qi stood steadily on the ground. She blinked hard and looked at the white-robed man standing in front of her. Under the night starlight, Yun Qingyan's face seemed to be covered with a layer of cold light. His long eyebrows were like swords, and his deep eyes were brighter than the stars. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, as if he had walked out of a painting. Qingyan's henjin? Meng Qi murmured. The strength supporting her waist just now was real. The person in front of her was also alive. Yun Qingyang turned to look at her, and his gaze quickly fell on the strange beast that had fallen on the hillside. Meng Qi followed his gaze and saw a huge black shadow on the hillside. The night wind brought with it a strong smell of blood. If one smelled it too much, it would make one nauseous. This should be the strange beast that had sneak attacked her just now. She was too careless. Such a huge creature was following behind her, and she actually didn't notice it at all. She even needed Senior Yun to save her. Meng Qi couldn't help but secretly look at Yun Qingyang again. The man's side profile was incomparably handsome, but his expression looked a little cold. Do you recognize it? Yun Qingyang turned to look at Meng Qi. Let me take a look. Meng Qi walked to the huge black shadow. As he got closer, the smell of blood suddenly became stronger. In addition, there was another smell that was even more unbearable than the smell of blood. Meng Qi didn't know how to describe that smell. It wasn't completely smelly. That feeling was as if he was in a place where filth had accumulated for years, or even decades. The smell of decay was emitted from the black shadow, mixed with the smell of blood, so it was even more unpleasant. Meng Qi took a few more steps forward. The shadow was larger than 2 horses and looked like a vulture with a pair of wings on its back. Compared to its body, its wings were much smaller, which was strangely funny. Meng Qi could not imagine how such a pair of wings could carry it to fly. I don't know him. She looked at him carefully for a moment and shook her head. Then do you know where this is? Yun Qingyan's tone was indifferent, and it was hard to tell whether she was happy or angry. Meng Qi turned his head and looked around. Other than the lake that was as huge as the sea, she could only vaguely see the undulating mountains in the distance as it was nighttime. Other than the place where she came from, there was a large forest. There were similar woods around the hill. Are we still in the east? Meng Qi asked. Yun Qingyang shook her head. This is the Starfall Sea. He said it casually, as if he was saying that the stars were shining brightly tonight and the weather was good. Starfall Sea? Meng Qi was instantly stunned. But she had never doubted Yun Qingyang, and she didn't have the slightest intention of doubting him now. Yun Qingyang said that this was the Starfall Sea. Then this must be the Starfall Sea. Meng Qi turned her head in a daze and looked at the huge lake that was as big as the sea. So that was the Starfall Sea? She still felt a little incredulous. She was actually in the Starfall Sea? However, it wasn't hard to guess. The huge lake reflected the stars in the sky. Looking down from above, it really felt like the stars had fallen into it. Meng Qi looked left and right again. She had been to the Starfall Sea once in her previous life. No, she couldn't say that she had been there before. She was just looking for a rare spiritual medicine, so she tried her best to run to the edge of the Starfall Sea and carefully searched for the spiritual medicine along the edge. She didn't dare to enter at all. It was also there that she picked up the injured Pei Mufeng. Meng Qi had heard about the situation in the Starfall Sea from Pei Mufeng. Even this genius sword cultivator of the Starfall Pavilion didn't dare to enter the real center of the Starfall Sea. He went deeper into the Starfall Sea than Meng Qi, but he was also very far from the center. Meng Qi remembered that she had asked him if there was really a sea in the Starfall Sea. The sea could swallow the stars, so it had such a name. What did Pei Mufeng say at that time? He seemed to tell Meng Qi that he didn't see the sea. Miasma was rampant inside, and danger were everywhere. All kinds of powerful beasts ran rampant. In some places, they even killed one with every step. It was extremely dangerous. It was far less romantic than its name sounded. Meng Qi looked at the dead beast beside her with lingering fear. If Qingyan's Henjin hadn't suddenly appeared just now, she would have become this guy's meal. It was indeed extremely dangerous. She exhaled softly and asked, Qingyan's Henjin, why are you here? Yun Qingyang, otherwise, where else could he be? He didn't answer this question. Instead, he walked to Meng Qi's side. This is the Nirvana eagle. Yun Qingyang pointed at the vulture-like beast and said, Nirvana ardent eagle? Meng Qi had never heard of this name before. She could be considered to have read a lot of books. She knew many celestial birds and beasts in the 3,000 worlds. The Starfall Sea had always been a forbidden area for cultivators. Although there had always been cultivators who ventured in for 10,000 years, very few people knew about the situation in the Starfall Sea. Even if there were relevant records, they were in the hands of the big sects. They wouldn't show it to people casually. I know about the ardent eagle. Meng Qi said, the east border has it. Its feathers are as hard as iron. Some sects will collect them to make soft armor. They can also be used to forge talismans. The blood of the ardent eagle can be used to treat cold poison. If a little of the ardent eagle's blood can be added to the spring warming pill, the effect will be even better. She raised her eyes to look at Yun Qingyang. But that ardent eagle can fly in the sky. Its wings are enormous. This Nirvana ardent eagle's wings are so small, but it can fly. Yun Qingyan's lips quickly rose. He looked at Meng Qi's clear eyes and coughed lightly. The Nirvana ardent eagle is an ardent eagle. The Starfall Sea was not like this before. It was no different from the 3,000 worlds. So that's how it is. Meng Qi nodded. She looked down at the enormous corpse of the Nirvana ardent eagle on the ground. The other's little wings weren't just small, there wasn't any hair on them. It looked like it had been scalded by boiling water. It was slightly laughable. But a beast that could survive in the Starfall Sea must have something extraordinary about it. Yun Qingyang raised his hand and a green jade dagger appeared in his hand. Is that the dragon sparrow blade? Meng Qi stared at the green jade dagger in his hand, and her eyes lit up. This was one of the favorite magic treasures of medical cultivators. It was a dagger made from the bones of a dragon sparrow that was unique to the demon realm. Whether it was used to draw blood or gather herbs, it would never harm the medicinal properties of these things. The dragon sparrow blade wasn't a particularly rare magic treasure, but it wasn't something that could be bought just because one wanted to. Meng Qi had been paying attention for a long time, but she hadn't seen anyone selling it. Okay. Yun Qingyang leaned over and reached out to cut the Nirvana ardent eagle's throat. Let me do it, let me do it. Meng Qi hurriedly took a step forward. Qingyan's Henjin, let me do this kind of small thing. She didn't have the dragon sparrow blade, so she directly took out her silver medicine knife and a light blue transparent porcelain bottle. She rushed to cut the Nirvana ardent eagle's throat. Yun Qingyang, Meng Qi was obviously very familiar with this kind of thing. She cut the Nirvana ardent eagle's throat and quickly used the porcelain bottle to collect the blood that flowed out. The small porcelain bottle in her hand could be considered a small magic treasure. Not only could it preserve the medicinal properties of the blood, but it also looked very small, and it could hold about a sea tank's worth of liquid. The Nirvana ardent eagle's body was huge, and blood flowed out continuously. Meng Qi changed 3 porcelain bottles before she finally finished collecting its blood. She carefully closed the lids of the bottles and held them in front of Yun Qingyang with both hands. Meng Qi looked up, and her eyes were shining. Qingyan's Henjin, the Nirvana ardent eagle's blood is all here. Here you go. Meng Qi wasn't short among female cultivators, but she was thin and looked a little frail. In addition, she still looked like a 17 or 18-year-old girl. She opened her clear eyes and looked up at the man who was about a head taller than her. The way she held the porcelain bottle with both hands really looked a little like she was offering a sacrifice. The stars were bright. The eyes of the girl in front of him were even brighter than the stars. And she was looking at him intently with such a pair of eyes that seemed to contain stars. There was a faint smile on the corners of her lips, and she looked very happy. Yun Qingyan's hand, which was hanging by her side, slightly bent her fingers. No need, he said hoarsely. You keep it for yourself. Oh. Meng Qi was a little disappointed. She originally thought that Yun Qingyang needed the blood of the Nirvana ardent eagle. She looked at the little head in front of her, which seemed to droop, and her disappointment was obvious. Yun Qingyang couldn't help but cough softly. Keep it first. We'll use it later. Okay. Meng Qi nimbly put the porcelain bottle into her storage bag. Let's continue. The Nirvana ardent eagle is the ardent eagle of the 3,000 worlds. You know about it, Yun Qingyang said. In the beginning, the Starfall Sea was just a passage for people from the 3 realms to come and go. He turned his head away, not looking at Meng Qi's bright eyes. She obviously treated him differently from others. Just by looking at her eyes, he could tell. However, Yun Qingyan's eyes darkened slightly. She had another person whom she cared about and cared about even more. That person was always in her heart. In order to protect that person, she would be angry with Ji Wujiong. She was so stubborn that she didn't even care about her own life. Yes. Meng Qi nodded, looking very obedient. Later, many chaotic wars between the 3 realms broke out around the Starfall Sea. Countless people were killed, and countless mighty figures died here. Yun Qingyang paused and said in a deep voice, the Starfall Sea didn't really fall from the sky. Those who fell were the geniuses who dominated the ancient times. I see. Meng Qi turned her head thoughtfully to look at the silent lake under the night sky. So it's not called the Starfall Sea because of this lake? No. Yun Qingyang glanced at the corpse of the Nirvana fierce eagle again. There was too much killing around the Starfall Sea. After the ancient cultivators died, the spiritual energy nourished the world. Similarly, the murderous aura and the evil aura left behind when they died also devoured the world. Over time, the creatures around the Starfall Sea were not allowed to enter, and it became a forbidden area. Some of the strange beasts that were originally around the Starfall Sea died. Some were strong enough and struggled to survive. They also became stronger and fiercer. Yun Qingyang added, the Nirvana fierce eagle is one of them. He said to Meng Qi, its blood, in addition to being able to detoxify cold poison, is mixed with a trace of Nirvana killing intent. It's best to use it to refine fire-type magic weapons. I see. Meng Qi thought for a moment and suddenly asked, Qingyan's Henjin, if you can't use up these 3 bottles of blood, can you leave some for me? She said, just a little will do. Yun Qingyang, he didn't need a single drop. Originally, he was going to give it to Meng Qi. What do you want to use it for? He asked casually. I know a cultivator who needs the fierce eagle's blood to upgrade his life-bonded magic weapon. If this is better than the one from the 3,000 worlds, I can give it to him. Oh! Yun Qingyang raised his eyebrows. He was about to ask who it was when he suddenly remembered that kid from the Burning Sky Palace. I need all of them, Yun Qingyang said lightly. Okay. Meng Qi nodded. She was just casually asking for Chu Tianfeng. Of course, this was the Nirvana fierce eagle that Yun Qingyang hunted. If Chu Tianfeng wanted it, Meng Qi wouldn't give it to him for free. He would definitely ask him to give the spirit stones to Qingyan's Henjin. Whether he needed them or not, this was a must. Since he needed them, Meng Qi naturally wouldn't ask for them for Chu Tianfeng. But this place doesn't seem to be filled with the legendary miasma and murderous aura. Meng Qi quickly skipped this matter. He looked around and asked curiously. If it weren't for the sneak attack of the Nirvana fierce eagle, the scenery here would have been quite beautiful. Follow me. Yun Qingyang flicked his sleeves and walked down the mountain. Meng Qi quickly followed. She knew that the Starfall Sea was extremely dangerous. There were many legends about the Starfall Sea in the 3,000 worlds. Moreover, she had heard a lot about it from Pei Mufeng. But now that she could follow Yun Qingyang, she would even dare to go to the more dangerous Great Devil Realm as long as Yun Qingyang said so, let alone the Starfall Sea. The two of them walked along the hillside toward the Starfall Sea that was as huge as an ocean. The night wind blew at their robes. Meng Qi had already put away his black diving suit, and his green robe was fluttering in the wind. It was just like Yun Qingyang's white robe. This scene was a bit like returning to the barrier of the medical cultivators competition. Meng Qi couldn't help but reach out and gently pinch her cheeks. Her face was a little cold from the wind, and it hurt to pinch it. How nice. She slowly exhaled. She wasn't dreaming. Although she didn't know why Yun Qingyang suddenly appeared, nor did she know why she fell into the Starfall Sea. That wasn't important anymore. Meng Qi stepped on Yun Qingyang's footsteps, feeling peaceful and happy in her heart. She followed him step by step. The two of them soon reached the foot of the mountain and were closer to the Starfall Sea. Yun Qingyang didn't stop and continued to walk forward. Meng Qi followed behind him obediently. Yun Qingyang didn't say what he was going to do, and she didn't take the initiative to ask. Seeing that they were getting closer and closer to the Starfall Sea, they didn't encounter any other exotic beasts along the way. The surroundings were quiet. Other than the sound of the wind, there was only the sound of their footsteps. Their footsteps weren't loud, but they could still be heard far in the empty night. Come and see. When they reached the edge of the Starfall Sea, Yun Qingyang finally stopped. Yes. Meng Qi stepped forward and stood side by side with him. Is this the Starfall Sea? Meng Qi raised her eyes and looked into the distance. Under the night sky, the entire Starfall Sea stretched as far as the eye could see. At this moment, standing on the shore, she could see even more clearly. The stars were reflected in the water, and the entire Starfall Sea was like a huge mirror. The stars in the sky and in the water were equally bright. Meng-Chi stared at it for a moment and felt as if the sky and the earth were connected. She didn't know what was the sky and what was the earth. Don't look for too long. Yun Qingyang flicked his sleeve and swept it across Meng-Chi's face. Yes. She suddenly came back to her senses and quickly took a step back. The Starfall Sea is not water, Meng-Chi murmured. The entire Starfall Sea seemed to be still. The night wind could even blow their robes, but it couldn't leave a ripple on the surface of the water. Didi Pavilionshi lowered her head and looked at the Starfall Sea that was already very close to her. Is this spiritual energy? It's spiritual energy that has been split into the 5 spiritual energies, Yun Qingyang said faintly. The 5 spiritual energies. Meng-Chi murmured repeatedly. Spiritual energy was composed of the 5 spiritual energies. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth each accounted for 1/5. However, this was only a legend. She had never seen spiritual energy that had been split into the 5 spiritual energies. This place was really full of miracles. Qing Yan's Henjin. Meng-Chi turned to look at Yun Qingyang. Have you been to the Starfall Sea before? She didn't remember Yun Qingyang mentioning the Starfall Sea in her previous life. However, he wasn't the talkative fox Su Junmo. He didn't like to talk about himself. Yes. Yun Qingyang nodded slightly. I have a friend. Meng-Chi said, Pei Mufeng, the pavilion master of the Starfall Pavilion. He also entered the Starfall Sea. I don't know if we will meet him. No, Yun Qingyang said. Huh. Meng-Chi was a little puzzled. Why not? The Starfall Sea has been connected to the 3 realms since ancient times, Yun Qingyang said. So the Starfall Sea exists in all 3 realms. Meng-Chi was stunned and suddenly realized. The place we are now is not the Starfall Sea of the 3 realms. The place we are at is the center of the Starfall Sea. Very few cultivators can come here, Yun Qingyang said. The center of the Starfall Sea? Meng-Chi murmured and repeated in disbelief. Then if I want to leave here, do I have to walk from the center to the edge? You're right to think that way, Yun Qingyang said. After he said this, there was a faint tiredness between his eyebrows. Yun Qingyang took a deep breath. The 5 spiritual energies were like a sweet spring, nourishing his limbs and bones. The night breeze was slightly cool, and there was a refreshing feeling as if a lifetime had passed. It's getting late. Let's find a place to rest first, Yun Qingyang said. He also didn't expect that Meng-Chi would bring him here by chance. When he wasn't injured, he could naturally come here. Now that he was seriously injured, and there were so many people eyeing him covetously, waiting for him to appear. At the edge of the Starfall Sea in the Demon Realm, someone had already set up an inescapable net, waiting for him to walk into it. With Yun Qingyang's current situation, it would be very difficult for him to break into the edge of the Starfall Sea. He didn't expect that Meng-Chi would bring him in directly. She had saved him once again. Yun Qingyang's eyes flashed. Well, in the future, even if he found the guy in his clan who taught Meng-Chi the 4 extremes and star formations without permission. If the 2 of them really liked each other, then he could. Yun Qingyang frowned slightly when he thought of this. He would think about it when he found him. Maybe Meng-Chi didn't have any feelings for that clansman at all, and it was just that guy's wishful thinking. Let's go, Yun Qingyang said, turning around and walking along the Starfall Sea. Oh. Meng-Chi, who was following behind him, said in a low tone, sounding a little disappointed. Yun Qingyang turned his head and glanced at her indifferently. What's wrong? Can I still get out? Meng-Chi suddenly felt a little desperate. In her previous life, she carefully explored the edge of the Starfall Sea, the outermost area, and was almost injured by exotic beasts. Pei Mufeng also said that the deeper they went into the Starfall Sea, the fiercer and stronger the exotic beasts were. Every step he took was incomparably dangerous. At that time, Pei Mufeng was already a spirit-severing cultivator. The sword spirit had also cultivated to the perfection of Realm 6. He only needed an opportunity to break through to Realm 7. In the entire Trichilia chasm, even among sword cultivators, Pei Mufeng was one of the top experts among the younger generation. Even he was seriously injured and almost died in the Starfall Sea. Meng Qi could already imagine how miserable she would be. You want to go out? Yun Qingyang asked. Yes, yes. Meng Qi nodded repeatedly. She came to Starfall Valley with Sikong Xing and the others, and then inexplicably came here. They couldn't find her, and she didn't know how worried they were now. She definitely had to go back. My friends are still waiting for me in Starfall Valley. If they don't see me, they will definitely look for me everywhere, Meng Qi explained. I have to leave this place as soon as possible. At the very least, she had to let Sikong Xing and the others know that she was fine. Qingyan's Henjin, how did you come in? She looked at Yun Qingyang curiously. Is there any other way to leave the Starfall Sea? No, Yun Qingyang said straightforwardly. I see. Meng Qi's face was full of disappointment. She hesitated and turned to look at the way she came. She was a golden core cultivator and a medical cultivator. Did she really have to kill her way out of the Starfall Sea? If not for Yun Qingyang, she would have died under the claws of the Nirvana Fierce Eagle just now. Yun Qingyang was very strong. But from the looks of it, he had no intention of leaving this place now. If she asked Meng Qi to ask him to send her out, Meng Qi hesitated. Starfall Sea, Starfall Sea. Why did she know so little about the Starfall Sea? What should she do now, Meng Qi's eyes suddenly lit up, and she was energized. She didn't know about the Starfall Sea, but she could go to the senior in the Heaven and Earth Book House to ask for advice. Perhaps there would be records about the Starfall Sea in the Heaven and Earth Book House. Qingyan's Henjin, let's find a place to rest first, Meng Qi said. Even if she wanted to go out, she wasn't in a hurry. It was night now, and danger was everywhere. Just like before, she didn't notice the danger at all. It should be better during the day. Okay. Yun Qingyang nodded slightly. He originally wanted to say that if Meng Qi insisted on going out, he could send her away first after a few days of recuperation. But he quickly changed his mind. With Meng Qi's current situation, it was safest for her to stay by his side. Let's go. Yun Qingyang made up his mind and walked forward with Meng Qi. He was very familiar with this place. Meng Qi followed him for a short while and suddenly saw a small boat tied to the shore of the Starfall Sea. Yun Qingyang seemed to have known that there was a boat here, and he stepped onto the boat. He turned around and beckoned Meng Qi. Come up. Oh, okay. Meng Qi hurriedly followed. The wooden boat was quite small. With the two of them standing inside, there was almost no space for a third person. There was no oar on the boat. Yun Qingyang flicked his sleeves, and the boat shot toward the center of the Starfall Sea like an arrow leaving the bow. Meng Qi was stunned. She subconsciously tilted her head and looked out of the boat. They didn't seem to be sailing on the sea, but more like soaring in the night sky. Under their feet was the Starfall Sea formed by the 5 spirits' primordial qi. It was bottomless, like an endless abyss that swallowed the stars. Just one more look would make one dazzled and mesmerized. Meng Qi's body swayed slightly. Yun Qingyang quickly reached out to hold her arm. Be careful. Yes. She stood still a little embarrassedly and asked, Qingyan's Henjin, where are we going? The Great Desolate Island, Yun Qingyang said. He seemed to have forgotten that he was still holding Meng Qi's arm, or he was worried that she would lose her balance. His fingers were firmly holding Meng Qi's elbow through his sleeves. Until the boat swayed slightly and stopped. Ah! Meng Qi looked up and couldn't help but exclaim softly. She stood on the shore and looked into the distance. There was nothing in the Starfall Sea. Now, there was a small island in front of them. Yun Qingyang abandoned the boat and landed on the island. He waited for Meng Qi to jump onto the island before letting go of her arm. Meng Qi felt that it was amazing. Yun Qingyang could even find such a boat and an island. Here, she looked around. Although she couldn't see clearly in the night, she could tell that the island was not a dangerous place. It was completely different from the legendary Starfall Sea. Meng Qi and the others walked for about half an hour. After passing through a garden on the island, a manor appeared in front of them. Yun Qingyang flicked his sleeves, and the manor's door opened. The luminous pearl gradually lit up, illuminating the entire manor. "Please." Yun Qingyang stepped aside to let Meng Qi in first. Meng Qi. She had a lot of questions to ask now, but she didn't know where to start. Yun Qingyang was so familiar with this place. Could it be that this was actually his home? Therefore, her master really did come from a reclusive family. However, no one would have thought that this family was actually hidden in the center of the Starfall Sea, which was the most dangerous place in the world. Meng Qi walked forward in a daze. Ever since she was involved here, Yun Qingyang seemed like a god descending from the heavens. Everything seemed so unreal. It was even more unreal than when she saw Yun Qingyang in the illusory array during the competition. Meng Qi lifted her feet and looked down at the ground subconsciously. It was as if she would fall into the endless void if she stepped on it. Then, she would wake up and find that it was just a dream. The manor was grand and spacious, with winding corridors and rows of rooms. Under the illumination of the luminous pearl, it looked very grand. Yun Qingyang followed them in and led Meng Qi along the long corridor toward the back of the manor. "You can rest here." He led Meng Qi to a room and pushed the door open. Meng Qi stood at the door and looked inside. The room was decorated very elegantly. There was a large carved bed in the innermost part of the room. Soft gauze hung from the top and covered the bed. There was a table in the middle of the room. There was a pen holder placed casually on it with a few brushes hanging from it. At the corner of the table, there was a white jade porcelain vase with a few budding peach blossoms in it. Everything looked as if someone often lived here and the owner only left and returned half a day later. "I'm next door." Yun Qingyang raised his chin slightly and pointed to another door not far away. "Okay." Meng Qi nodded. "Have a good rest." Yun Qingyang looked at her deeply. "We'll talk tomorrow." "Okay." She answered absent-mindedly. Meng Qi watched Yun Qingyang leave and watched the door opposite her open and then close. She still felt that it was too unreal. She stood at the door for a moment before slowly closing the door and walking into the room. Meng Qi sat down on the soft bed. After a while, she came back to her senses and remembered what she was going to do. She quickly took out the jade slip of Sky Beyond from her storage bag. Xue Jinwen reminded her not to trust the old man in the Heaven and Earth Book house too much. However, that senior was very knowledgeable. The Heaven and Earth Book house was full of bamboo slips and jade slips that Meng Qi had never heard of. Meng Qi really didn't expect that such an old man would plot against her. When they first met, she was just a small cultivator in the foundation establishment stage. She held the jade slip of Sky Beyond. The moment she entered, she felt as if she had forgotten something. However, Meng Qi quickly calmed down and completely entered Sky Beyond. A light flashed in front of her eyes. When she opened her eyes, she was standing outside Sky Beyond City again. She was about to go directly to the Heaven and Earth Book house when the nameplate suddenly vibrated violently. Meng Qi quickly picked up the nameplate. She knew that this meant that a cultivator she knew in Sky Beyond had sent her a message. When she was in Sky Beyond, she seemed to have only exchanged nameplates with Xue Jinwen. Sure enough, Meng Qi reached out and held the nameplate. Her divine sense entered and saw the message that Xue Jinwen had left for her. "Meng Qi, reply quickly when you see this message." "Meng Qi, where did you go? We searched all over Starfall Valley but couldn't find you. If you go to Sky Beyond, you must contact me. Meng Qi, are you okay?" Meng Qi quickly held her nameplate. This was the first time she used this function of the nameplate. Her divine sense could write a message and then send it to Xue Jinwen. This should be similar to a flying sword message or a secret voice transmission technique. It could let the other party immediately receive the message she sent. After a while, her nameplate vibrated again. "Thank God. Meng Qi. It's good that you're okay. We were worried to death." Xue Jinwen's message came quickly. "Meng Qi, come to Sky Beyond Tower. We'll meet here." "Okay." Meng Qi quickly replied. She originally wanted to go to the Sky Beyond Tower, but now she changed her direction and directly used the teleportation array to go to the floating island where Sky Beyond Tower was. As soon as Meng Qi stepped out of the teleportation array, she heard cheers. Before she could react, Sikong Xing, who was dressed in fiery red, pounced on her. Meng Qi. She hung on Meng Qi's shoulder. You suddenly disappeared. You scared us to death. Xing Xing. Meng Qi's heart warmed. She gently patted Sikong Xing's shoulder. I'm fine. Where did you go? Sikong Xing heard this and quickly let go of Meng Qi. She looked at her from head to toe. You don't know. We almost searched the entire Starfall Valley. Pavilion Master Pei has already gone to the Starfall Sea. The elders of the Starfall Pavilion asked their disciples to help us search. We almost searched the entire Starfall Valley and Starfall City, but we couldn't find you. We were all scared to death. I'm sorry. Meng Qi was touched. Where are the others? Sister Shui went to inform Su Junmo and the rest. They're still looking for you around Starfall Valley, Sikong Xing said as she pulled Meng Qi towards Sky Beyond Tower. Let's go in and wait for them. Okay. Meng Qi nodded. She subconsciously looked at the floating island in the sky. Her heart skipped a beat. Meng Qi quickly retracted her gaze and walked side by side with Sikong Xing into Sky Beyond Tower. Fellow Taoists, please. The welcoming cultivator of Sky Beyond Tower quickly welcomed them. Do you have a reservation? Give us a private room. Sikong Xing said, we have 4 people. We'll be there in a while. I'm sorry. The welcoming cultivator smiled and said, the last private room has just been reserved. We can only sit in the main hall. Hey! Just as the welcoming cultivator finished speaking, a young male cultivator's voice suddenly came from behind Meng Qi. Is this fellow Daoist Meng Qi? Meng Qi was startled. She turned to look at the person. The young man in a blue robe stood tall. He had a handsome face. However, Meng Qi did not recognize him. It's indeed fellow Daoist Meng Qi. The young man cupped his hands towards Meng Qi. I'm sorry for disturbing you. Please don't blame me. May I ask who you are? Meng Qi returned the greeting. I don't think we've met before. She looked at her good friend beside her, who had immediately become on guard, and gave Sikong Xing a reassuring smile. Nothing should happen in the Heavens Beyond Pavilion. Fellow Daoist Meng has never seen me before, but I've seen your heroic appearance with my own eyes. The male cultivator smiled slightly and cupped his hands again. It's not a coincidence that fellow Daoist was recognized by senior Lin Yang's will during the competition. I also admire fellow Daoist very much. Fellow Daoist, you're too polite. Meng Qi returned the greeting. Does fellow Daoist need a private room? The young male cultivator looked at Meng Qi. It just so happens that the last private room was reserved by me. Since fellow Daoist Meng needs it, please use it first. Meng Qi was quite embarrassed. No need. It's the same for us in the main hall. It's fine, it's fine. The young male cultivator waved his hand. I wished I could fight side by side with fellow Daoist that day. What's a small private room? Even if fellow Daoist Meng doesn't need it, I don't need it either. Please don't reject it. Sikong Xing reached out and pulled Meng Qi's sleeve, winking at her. Thank you, fellow Daoist. Meng Qi returned the greeting. Please. The young male cultivator did not say anything more. He turned around and returned to his friend's side. The two of them turned towards the main hall and whispered something as they walked. His friend also turned around and looked at Meng Qi from afar before turning back. He. Sikong Xing hugged Meng Qi's shoulder. The two of them followed the welcoming cultivator to the private room in Sky Beyond Tower. She laughed softly. You didn't expect this, did you? It's a little unexpected. Meng Qi had never encountered such a thing. After you disappeared, we looked for you everywhere in Descending Star City. These medical cultivators also helped us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to search the entire Descending Star City so quickly. Millimeter Meng Qi stood on the stairs and lowered her head to look at the cultivator from earlier. The other party happened to be looking at her as well. He picked up the wine cup in his hand and raised it towards her with his friend from afar. Actually, I'm not surprised. Sikong Xing pulled Meng Qi up and said, that day in the apricot forest, Many medical cultivators sincerely wanted to help you. Many of them were also quite nice. Millimeter Meng Qi heard this and smiled sweetly. There are many nice people in the first place. Oh right. She suddenly remembered. Did you see Ji Wujiong after that? Ji Wujiong? Sikong Xing was startled. She shook her head. No. After he rushed out of the apricot forest that day, I never saw him again. What's wrong? Meng Qi was about to speak when the door of the private room was suddenly pushed open again. The first person to rush in was Chu Tianfeng. He practically jumped in front of Meng Qi. He grabbed her shoulders and looked at her from head to toe for a while before he heaved a sigh of relief. Meng Qi, next time. It's useless no matter what you say. Chu Tianfeng was about to go crazy. I'll follow you no matter what you say. Su Junmo, who just came in, was speechless. Young man, this is the heavens beyond heaven. You said such things and did such things. Do you still want to come here in the future? At this moment, on the highest floating island in the heavens beyond heaven, a man in a white robe slowly opened his eyes. His slender fingers gently tapped on the table beside him. His gaze was languid and tinged with a hint of coldness. Chapter 99. The waiter of heavens beyond quickly served a pot of tea and teacups. The door of the private room opened and closed. Meng Qi and the others sat around the table. No one touched their chopsticks, and they were all listening attentively to her description of what happened in Starfall Valley that day. Starfall Sea? Chu Tianfeng almost jumped up. You're in the Starfall Sea now? Yes. Meng Qi was also helpless. The Starfall Sea was an absolutely dangerous place in the 3000 worlds. Legend had it that anyone below the spirit-severing stage would die as soon as they stepped into it. If it weren't for Yun Qingyang, Meng Qi would probably have died under the claws of the Nirvana fierce eagle. Meng Qi. Qin Xiumor calmed down. Where are you in the Starfall Sea? I should be in the center. Central? Even Su Junmo sucked in a cold breath. If it was at the edge, they could still find a way to break in and bring Meng Qi out. Wait, isn't the entrance to the Starfall Sea in the east closed? Su Junmo asked. When Pei Mufeng went in, he brought you with him into the Starfall Sea. What about him? No. Meng Qi shook her head and told everyone what happened in the Star Lake. So you're saying? Sikong Xing was stunned. The Star Lake in Starfall Valley is connected to the Starfall Sea? Yes. Meng Qi nodded. That day, when we were about to flip over Starfall Valley, the Star Lake looked fine. She said, I didn't expect that something like this would happen. Su Junmo looked at Meng Qi thoughtfully. Pavilion Master Pei also went to the Starfall Sea. Did you meet him? No. Meng Qi shook her head. She thought for a moment and didn't mention Yun Qingyang. Ji Wujiong was with me at the Star Lake. Did you see him? No. Su Junmo shook his head firmly. He took a deep look at Meng Qi and said, After you disappeared, the Falling Star Pavilion's disciples and we looked for you nearby. We didn't see Ji Wujiong. Strange, they can't see any changes in the Star Lake? It's said that only 3 disciples can use the Star Lake for a day each year. The disciples of the Falling Star Pavilion are not familiar with that place. Chu Tianfeng continued, Meng Qi, how can you come to this sky beyond heaven? Is it safe for you? It is said that the Starfall Sea is filled with miasma and ferocious beasts. You can kill one with every step you take. Are you sure you can do this? He looked at Meng Qi up and down anxiously and asked, The ferocious beasts in the Starfall Sea are much stronger than those in the outside world. You must not fight them head-on if you encounter them. Thank you for your concern. Meng Qi nodded at Chu Tianfeng. I'm in a relatively safe place right now. There are no exotic beasts for the time being. Is there a way to leave? Qin Xiumor asked. This was what Meng Qi was worried about. The center of the Starfall Sea is not as dangerous and terrifying as the legends say. She said, It's just that if I want to leave there, I can only walk from the center to the edge. Isn't that very dangerous? Sikong Xing asked. Yes. Meng Qi said straightforwardly, I think it will be very difficult for me to leave by myself. Starfall Sea. Xue Jinwen, who had been silent all this time, thought for a while. I once saw some records in the library at home. It is said that the place is also simply divided into the east, west, south, and north realms. As she spoke, she asked the waiter of the Sky Beyond Heaven Tower to bring her the 4 treasures of the study. After watching the door of the private room close again, Xue Jinwen spread the white paper on the table and picked up the brush to draw. It is said that the center of the Starfall Sea is a huge lake. As she spoke, she drew a circle in the middle to represent the lake. Then, she divided the lake into 4 parts along the circle. Xue Jinwen was born in the Wind League. Although she was the unfavored daughter of the Xue family, she had been in the Wind League for a long time. However, the Wind Alliance had existed for tens of thousands of years. Even Chu Tianfeng and Qin Xiumo, who were also disciples of large sects, had never heard of some of the secrets she knew. Several ancestors of my family have entered the Starfall Sea personally or sent people to do so. Xue Jinwen said, they all entered from the west. This place, she drew the shape of a wave on the west side. It is an endless forest and miasma. There are countless poisonous insects and beasts hibernating in it. Because my ancestors were medical cultivators, they were lucky enough to pass through the forest. However, it is difficult to go further. Most of my ancestors stopped at the edge of the forest. The contents of the books at home are mostly about the murderers and miasma in the forest. Meng Qi listened attentively. The west side is forest and miasma. Xue Jinwen continued, according to the books, the west side of the Starfall Sea is a relatively less dangerous place. So if I want to come out, it's best to choose the west side. Meng Qi asked. 8 ancestors of my family died in the Starfall Sea. Xue Jinwen looked up at Meng Qi and said quietly, Meng Qi, someone from the Burning Sky Palace has also been to the Starfall Sea. Chu Tianfeng continued, they also entered the Starfall Sea from the west side. As far as I know, 12 elders at the spirit severing stage or above died there 2kxs. Last he spoke, he took the pen from Xue Jinwen's hand and told Meng Qi the secrets of his sect without hesitation. In the forest on the west side of the Starfall Sea, besides the poisonous insects and miasma, there are also powerful strange beasts. According to the descriptions of the ancestors who came out alive, those strange beasts are at least at the spirit severing stage 5 or 6. Meng Qi, Cloud Peak entered the Starfall Sea from the south. Qin Xiumo continued. Cloud Peak was the sect he belonged to. There are many swamps in the south side of the Starfall Sea. It's a bit like the swamps in the south, but it's more dangerous. There are countless poisonous insects, and there are also fierce beasts that can survive in the swamps and on land. I don't know how many people went to the sect, but there are records that more than 20 cultivators died there. Meng Qi, I know a little about the situation on the east side of the Starfall Sea. Meng Qi also told him what he knew without hesitation. Her understanding of the east side of the Starfall Sea was almost all what she heard from Pei Mufeng in her previous life. There was a great battle between demonic cultivators and cultivators on the east side of the Starfall Sea. The killing intent hasn't dissipated yet. So it's probably equivalent to a large formation. One step in the formation, one kill, one danger at every step. The fierce beasts that can survive in such a place are all cunning and intelligent. Some of them even gather together and ambush others. In the past, Pei Mufeng had been injured by such cunning fierce beasts. If he hadn't coincidentally encountered Meng Qi and been picked up by her, he would have been killed. He would have quickly become food in the stomach of the fierce beasts that had been following him and wanted to kill him after he was heavily wounded. Meng Qi thought for a moment, then took the pen and drew a big cross on the east side. A genius sword show like Pei Mufeng had almost died on the east side. She definitely wouldn't risk going there. The swamps in the south are also good for ambushes. Meng Qi drew a cross on the south side. Does anyone know the situation on the north side? Everyone in the room shook their heads. Meng Qi was slightly hesitant. So many elders and experts of the Wind Alliance had died on the west side. If she went, she would probably be even worse off. Meng Qi. Xing comforted her. The Starfall Sea is connected to the three realms. We can think of other ways. Meng Qi heard this and turned to look at Su Junmo with Xing. This person was really experienced and knowledgeable in the demon realm. He even knew the secrets of the demon realm's big shots. He must be familiar with the Starfall Sea. Why are you looking at me? Su Junmo said, I haven't been there either. Xing, you should have heard of one of the most vicious curses in the demon realm. It's a curse that sky demons fall into the Starfall Sea. When he said this, he couldn't help but mutter. There was news in the demon realm that the demon lord had died in the Starfall Sea. His body and soul were gone. Really, just thinking about it made him angry. Then, Meng Qi was a little depressed. She put her chin on the table and looked at the people around her. The demon realm? Don't. Su Junmo quickly waved his hand. The demon realm is even more terrifying than the Starfall Sea. The people in the private room looked at each other. There were too many legends about the Starfall Sea in the Trichilia chasm. Basically, those below the spirit severing stage would die as soon as they stepped in. They were considered the best of the younger generation, but they were still at a loss when it came to the Starfall Sea. Most importantly, with their current abilities, they didn't even know where Meng Qi was in the Starfall Sea. Even if they knew and joined forces to break in, the final result was that not only would they not be able to save Meng Qi, but they would also be wiped out. There's no other way. Meng Qi stood up. I have to go to the Heaven and Earth Book House. Heaven and Earth Book House? Xue Jinwen suddenly remembered that Meng Qi had mentioned it before. It was a place where they could use spiritual points to borrow books. I'll go with you. She quickly stood up as well. We'll go too, Chu Tianfeng immediately said. No. Su Junmo shook his head. You can't go. Why? Xue Jinwen looked at him curiously. From his tone, Su Junmo seemed to know about the Heaven and Earth Book House. Did he also know that one had to use 10 spiritual points to borrow a book there? Those were spiritual points, not spirit stones. There's no danger there. Meng Qi can go by himself. Su Junmo paused, glanced at the others, and continued, what we need to do now is to collect as much information about the Starfall Sea as possible. In short, no matter what method we use, the more, the faster, the better. Xue Jinwen glanced at Su Junmo's face. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Although she was still very curious, she didn't insist on accompanying Meng Qi to the Heaven and Earth Book House. Meng Qi, Su Junmo looked at Meng Qi. Can you guarantee that the place you are at is safe? As soon as he said this, everyone looked at Meng Qi again. They had never heard that there was a safe place in the Starfall Sea. Now, either Meng Qi had made a mistake and she wasn't in the Starfall Sea. Or, there was indeed such a place in the center of the Starfall Sea. Otherwise, with her cultivation level, she would have been torn to pieces by the murderers inside long ago. Yes, Meng Qi nodded and said firmly. In fact, she didn't know if the Great Desolate Island was safe or not. However, with Yun Qingyang by her side, no matter how dangerous the place was, it seemed to be safe for her. Okay. Su Junmo nodded slightly. We'll meet here again after 24 hours. Meng Qi, can you do that? Yes. Meng Qi nodded without hesitation. You can go to the Heaven and Earth Book House. We'll leave first. By the way, Su Junmo took out his nameplate. Let's exchange the information on the nameplates so that it's easier to contact each other. Okay. Meng Qi quickly took out her nameplate and exchanged it with the others. This way, she could contact them just like she did with Xue Jinwen. As long as they were in the heavens beyond heaven, it would be very convenient for them to contact each other. I'll leave first. Meng Qi turned and walked out of the door. Wait. Xue Jinwen chased after her and stopped her. Meng Qi, do you have enough spirit points? She didn't know how many books she needed to borrow and how many spirit points she needed to go to the Heaven and Earth Book House to check out the books related to the Starfall Sea. Although Meng Qi had said before that she had a lot of spirit points, it was still not enough. Xue Jinwen was still a little worried. Before Meng Qi could answer, Chu Tianfeng spoke first. Damn. Spirit points. Does it cost spirit points to borrow books from the Heaven and Earth Book House? Yes. Shui Jinwen looked at him, then looked at Su Junmo and said, 10 spirit points can be used to borrow a book. 10. Even though Chu Tianfeng was from a large sect, he was shocked when he heard this number. I heard that spirit points are very hard to come by. The elders in our sect mentioned that if we want to open a shop here, we need to use spirit points. Chu Tianfeng didn't say something. Opening a shop for a month would only cost a few dozen spirit points. Let me see. Meng Qi glanced at him and held the nameplate to check her remaining spirit points. I still have. Hey! It seems to have increased again. Now it's 1, 10, 100, 23,000 spirit points. Shui Jinwen, Chu Tianfeng, Qin Xiumo, even Su Junmo, he looked up at the roof. She must be scared. Hee. It should be enough. Meng Qi put away the nameplate. I'll go first. Thank you for your hard work. She saluted everyone, turned around, opened the door, and walked out. More than 20,000 spirit points. The door closed again. Chu Tianfeng still hadn't recovered from the shock. Is she the cultivator with the most spirit points in the entire sky beyond heaven? And she's only a golden core cultivator. If this gets out, those sect elders will die of jealousy, right? You might as well count all the spirit points that those sects have. Meng Qi can definitely be ranked in the top 10. Su Junmo wanted to roll his eyes again. As far as I know, it's only 800 spirit points to exchange for an opportunity to explore the blessed enclave in the surrounding mountains. Chu Tianfeng didn't say anything. He looked at the silent Qin Xiumo thoughtfully. The two looked at each other and quickly skipped the topic. Are we going to collect information about the fallen star sea now? Yes. Su Junmo didn't want to talk about this issue. Let's split up. We'll meet here at this time tomorrow. Chu Tianfeng and Qin Xiumo quickly left. Even Sikong Xing left. She said that she wanted to find a way to contact her father and see if her rich father knew about the fallen star sea. Only Shui Jinwen walked to Su Junmo after they all left. What's the matter? Su Junmo looked at her. Did you guide Meng Qi to the Heaven and Earth Book House? She smiled and asked softly. Yes. Su Junmo nodded. Shui Jinwen reached out and touched a few strands of hair on her temples. I've been in Sky Beyond Heaven for several years, but I've never heard of the Heaven and Earth Book House. Meng Qi mentioned it and said that she needed spirit points to borrow the books inside. I thought she met a swindler. What are you trying to say? Su Junmo stared at her for a while and asked slowly. I'm just a little worried about her, Shui Jinwen said. If I knew it was you who asked her to go, I wouldn't be so worried. Let's go. She said again, I hope Meng Qi can come back safely from the fallen star sea. Where are you going? Su Junmo didn't move. Instead, he asked. The Shui family. Shui Jinwen said, I'm going to find my elder brother. But haven't you left the Shui family? Su Junmo frowned. You can wait for us in Rosy Lane. Su Junmo, you should have heard about the barrier of the Xinglin Holy Land tournament. Shui Jinwen didn't beat around the bush. I've always been curious about why you were willing to befriend the Wind Alliance and the Shui family. After all, as the envoy of the Demon Realm and the future leader of the Sky Demon Arctic Fox clan, the major sects of the Four Realms would be happy to befriend you. Medical cultivators have long lost their ancient glory in the 3,000 worlds. Sword cultivators and magic cultivators are the strongest in the world. Shui Jinwen's eyes moved. Why do you value the Wind Alliance so much? Shui Jinwen seemed to be asking a question, but it also seemed like she was talking to herself. Without waiting for Su Junmo to answer, she continued, later, I accidentally found out that you seem to be quite interested in the Xinglin Holy Land. You should also know that the Wind Alliance can open the barrier of the tournament for the second time in 10 years. For thousands of years, the 12 medical cultivator sects of the Four Realms can enter the barrier of the tournament 3 times every 10 years. Everyone knows why we're going in, but everyone has a tacit understanding and won't say anything. Shui Jinwen ran her fingers through her hair again. 2,000 years ago, the 3,000 worlds suffered another catastrophe. The 2 major medical cultivator sects in the south and east. You should have heard of them. They were once powerful sects that could be compared to the Shui family, but they were tragically wiped out. Su Junmo's expression changed slightly. Of course, he knew about this matter. It spread throughout the three realms, and the demon realm's cruel and murderous reputation shocked the entire three realms. After that incident, the relationship between the demon realm and the 3,000 worlds was further eased. The reason why he could come and go freely in the 3,000 worlds and be treated as a guest of honor by many sects was also because of this matter. I know, Su Junmo said in a deep voice. The two major sects had thousands of people. One of the sects even had a dongjin cultivator, but no one survived. The people were in a terrible situation, and their inheritance was cut off. The 3,000 worlds were furious, and when the news reached the ears of the ancestors of the family, they felt even more sad for the death of their own kind. Medical cultivators. Shui Jinwen sighed softly. They can be considered to have saved the dying and healed the injured. Countless people survived, but they were so weak that they couldn't protect themselves at all. Su Junmo did not say anything. However, according to the records in the family's library, it was not like this in the ancient times tens of thousands of years ago. Medical cultivators were once on par with sword cultivators and dharma cultivators. Not only could they save people, but they could also hurt people. At least, they could protect themselves, and they would not be reduced to ghosts under the butcher's knife and be at the mercy of others, Shui Jinwen said. Therefore, since then, the Medical Cultivators Dharma Assembly Alliance was born. All the medical cultivators in the world, regardless of whether they belonged to the 12. No. At that time, only the top 10 medical cultivator sects were left. Su Junmo's expression changed slightly, and his gaze became sharper than before. You guessed it. Shui Jinwen was attentive to begin with. She saw the change in Su Junmo's expression and smiled indifferently. It doesn't matter if you're from a small sect or an itinerant cultivator. As long as you're a medical cultivator and are outstanding enough, you can get a chance to enter the Apricot Forest Competitions barrier once every 10 years. The 12 medical cultivator sects spent thousands of years, but they could not decipher the secret of the Apricot Forest Competitions barrier. They could not pass the test. That tragic extermination scared them, and they couldn't wait any longer. Although everyone was reluctant to give up such an opportunity, the Apricot Forest sacred ground was passed down from ancient times. It is said that it contains the last will of an ancient medical cultivator. As long as you pass the test, you can become his successor. Not only can you inherit his medical skills, but you can also learn the powerful attack methods of the ancient medical cultivators. However, so much time has passed, and the 12 medical cultivator sects can be considered to have produced many capable people. Every 10 years, a new genius will appear. Shui Jinwen said slowly, this Apricot Forest Competitions barrier, but no one has ever passed the test. Sword cultivators and Dharma cultivators are getting stronger and stronger. The stronger they are, the more dangerous places they can explore. Some of the originally extinct legacies are gradually reappearing in the world. The weapon cultivators have also suddenly obtained ancient legacies and are gradually revitalizing. Shui Jinwen looked at Su Junmo and raised her eyebrows. The demon realm has always produced many capable people, and there are many powerhouses. The current demon lord is said to be a rare genius in the Sky Demon White Tiger clan. As for the demon realm, she sighed softly. They have always been restless, coveting the vast world of the Trichiliachasm and the rich resources. They are always looking for opportunities to invade. Even my father is starting to become anxious. They are even discussing that they will only keep one chance for the current top 10 medical cultivator sects, and give up the other 2 chances. After all, the weapon cultivators are rising again, making everyone feel that as long as they can pass the barrier test and obtain the legacy of that powerful senior, then the medical cultivators can be revitalized like the weapon cultivators. Shui Jinwen's voice was gentle and pleasant as she told these secrets. Although it was a secret, there were actually many people who knew about it. Even if 2 of the 12 medical cultivator sects in the 4 realms had been completely destroyed, there were still many families like the Shui family that had been passed down for 10,000 years. There were many disciples who knew about the history of medical cultivators. Xue Jinwen reached out and tucked the strand of hair on her cheek behind her ear. Meng Qi passed the barrier test in front of almost all the medical cultivators in the 4 realms, as well as the medical cultivator sects. Even though she rejected Senior Lin Yang in the end, she was recognized and became her friend. She looked at Su Junmo and said softly, "I guess father will think of a way to let big brother marry Meng Qi." "What?" Su Junmo did not expect this at all and blurted out, "My big brother Xue Chengxian." Xue Jinwen looked at the shock on his face, and a trace of sadness flashed in her eyes. But she quickly pulled herself together and continued, "I'm not boasting, but he is indeed a rare genius among the younger generation of medical cultivators. He is the future head of the Xue family, and may even be the future head of the Wind Alliance. He is handsome and gentle, and is also the most suitable Dao companion in the hearts of many female cultivators. So now that Meng Qi is like this, maybe we can ask the Wind Alliance for help." Xue Jinwen said, "My big brother even gave his blood moon to her. Even without father, I think he won't stand by and do nothing." Xue Jinwen paused and said, "If Meng Qi did not fall into the Starfall Sea, I would not have mentioned this. But now, with just the few of us, I'm afraid." She did not finish speaking, but Su Junmo also understood what she meant. He actually had a very strong force in his hands that he could mobilize. It was the secret guards personally trained by his lord. The Demon City Lord lived thousands of years ago and was a name that Meng Qi had never heard of. Sigh, she sighed softly and put the jade slip back on the bookshelf. Searching one by one like this was similar to looking for a needle in a haystack. It was definitely not a solution. Forget it for today. She hesitated for a moment, turned around, and walked out of the Heaven and Earth Bookhouse in disappointment. Before leaving Heaven Beyond Heaven City, Meng Qi subconsciously looked up at the highest floating island again. Then, she stepped into the teleportation formation. Starfall Sea, Great Desolate Island. Meng Qi slowly opened her eyes. The jade slip in Heaven Beyond Heaven in her hand was a little warm from her grip. Although she did not find what she needed, it was a pleasant surprise to see a few good friends in Heaven Beyond Heaven. Meng Qi rested her chin on one hand and looked at the furnishings in the room. She did not know how long Qingyan's Henjin planned to stay here. Also, why was he also in Starfall Sea? She was really curious. Meng Qi remembered that when she first met Yun Qingyang in her previous life, she also descended from the sky like this. At that time, she was looking for a spiritual herb on a mountain. There were many poisonous snakes on the mountain, and the spiritual herb was a treasure that they guarded. Although Meng Qi brought a lot of snake repellent powder, when she finally picked the spiritual herb, she was still surrounded by angry poisonous snakes. At that time, she was only in the 5th stage of the Foundation Establishment stage and was extremely weak. After barely killing dozens of poisonous snakes, a snake took advantage of the situation and fiercely bit her arm. It was at that time that Yun Qingyang descended from the sky like a god. He only waved his sleeve, and those snakes surged crazily like boiling water. In just a moment, they all died in front of Meng Qi. Meng Qi still remembered the first sentence he said to her was, "You're just a little Foundation Establishment cultivator. What are you doing here? Do you want to die?" Of course she wanted to die. At that time, she picked the spiritual herb to save a man in the city who had a strange disease. Yun Qingyang sent her all the way back to the city at the foot of the mountain. He seemed to be quite interested in watching Meng Qi refine medicine and then treat the patient. 3 days later, the man could finally get out of bed. Yun Qingyang also said to her, "Come with me. I'll teach you how to save your own life before saving others." Meng Qi followed him. It was as if everything was so natural. She never asked who he was or where he came from. Meng Qi also never doubted whether the man who saved her life had any ulterior motives. At that time, she was poor and was just a little Foundation Establishment cultivator. The only medical skills she had were probably not worth mentioning in the other party's eyes. The two of them naturally traveled together like this. Now that she thought about it, Meng Qi felt a little amused. Yun Qingyang never even mentioned his name to her, nor did he say that he wanted to take her as his disciple. In the beginning, he didn't teach her everything. Yun Qingyang didn't even interfere with Meng Qi's life. He said that he wanted Meng Qi to go with him, but it was more like he followed Meng Qi. Meng Qi wanted to cultivate medical skills. She didn't just practice those medical skills. They passed by the cities and sects along the way. She treated people almost everywhere she went. Occasionally, she would pick up some injured cultivators along the way. As long as they were still breathing, Meng Qi would find a way to save them. At the beginning, Yun Qingyang just watched curiously and occasionally protected her. At the beginning, Meng Qi was very confused. She didn't know what the other was thinking. Then slowly, Yun Qingyang started to teach her formations. He disliked that the fire Meng Qi used to make medicine was too weak, and changed the Great Li fire formation for her to use. The formations he casually carved on the medicine cauldron could make medicine make it faster and the Dan pills purer. When Meng Qi had some whimsical and naive ideas, he would excitedly practice them with her and help her think of solutions. Occasionally, he would find her cultivation progress slow and teach her the Great Star formation. He felt that medical cultivators were too weak at protecting themselves and taught her how to forge silver medicine knives. Later, he even taught her the Great Four formation. The two of them were neither friends nor disciples, but she followed Yun Qingyang for many years. Meng Qi propped her chin on her hand, her gaze following the night pearl in front of her. Remembering the events of her previous life, she felt her heart warm. It seemed that it was the same in her previous life. From the first time they met, Yun Qingyang didn't like to explain himself, and his actions were a little unexpected. If it were someone else, they might think that he was a little strange. But she was willing to believe him. Meng Qi narrowed her eyes slightly and looked around. Actually, if she wasn't afraid that her friends wouldn't find her, she would be worried. The Fallen Star Sea was the Fallen Star Sea. To be able to stay here with Yun Qingyang, even if she went to the Great Devil Sky, she would probably think that it was a paradise, let alone the Fallen Star Sea. Meng Qi stretched and was about to lie down to rest when she suddenly realized little Qi hadn't been released yet. No wonder she felt that something was missing just now. Meng Qi hurriedly took out the beast house from her storage bag. She suddenly jumped up. The beast house was empty. The little white tiger, which had always been lying lazily inside and resting on the bamboo bed in the beast house most of the time every day, was gone. Little Qi. Meng Qi was a little flustered. She knew that little Qi definitely couldn't have run into her storage bag from the beast house, but she still quickly checked her storage bag. Still nothing. Meng Qi raised the beast house, but the beast house was simple and could be seen at a glance. No matter how young little Qi was, it was still a sky demon white tiger. It couldn't have hidden in the beast house without her noticing. She instantly became even more flustered. Could it be that when she was swept into this place? No. Meng Qi opened her eyes in the Fallen Star Sea and checked her storage bag immediately. Little Qi was definitely still there at that time. She suddenly jumped off the bed and quickly ran out of the door without even putting on her shoes properly. Qing Yan's Henjin. Meng Qi didn't care if she would disturb the other party. Whenever she thought about where little Qi had landed in the Fallen Star Sea, her heart would be in a mess. It was still so young, and it had suffered such serious injuries. If it encountered a ferocious bird like the Nirvana fierce eagle, it would definitely. Meng Qi suddenly shook her head and didn't dare to continue thinking. She quickly rushed to Yun Qingyan's room and knocked on the door. Qingyan's Henjin, are you asleep? Meng Qi took a deep breath and quickly said, I have something to ask of you. She paused and quickly said, I have a spirit beast. When I fell into the Fallen Star Sea, it was still in my storage bag. But now, there's no trace of it in the beast house. Qingyan's Henjin. Meng Qi knocked on the door again. The room was silent. Yun Qingyang didn't seem to have made a sound from beginning to end. She instantly became even more worried. Qingyan's Henjin, are you okay? She knew that as powerful as he was, nothing could happen to him. However, Yun Qingyang clearly said that he was just opposite and that Meng Qi could come to him if she needed anything. But now, there was no movement. Meng Qi knocked on the door again. Qingyan's Henjin, Are you in there? She became more and more uneasy. She waited for a while, but the room was still silent. Meng Qi gritted her teeth, turned her wrist, and took out a silver medicine knife. She held the silver medicine knife in her right hand, held her breath, and reached out to push the door open. The door wasn't locked, so Meng Qi opened it with a push. Yun Qingyan's room looked similar to hers. She carefully stepped into the room. Qingyan's Henjin? Meng Qi called out softly again. There was no one in the room. Meng Qi quickly looked around. Only in the innermost room, heavy gauze hung down, covering the large carved bed. Vaguely, there seemed to be a black shadow inside. Meng Qi took a deep breath, held the medicine knife tighter, and walked toward the bed. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The room was still quiet, and only her soft footsteps could be heard. Meng Qi walked to the bed and held the medicine knife tightly. Qingyan's Henjin, sorry to offend you. Then, she reached out and lifted the heavy gauze. Chapter 100. Under the soft light of the night-luminescent pearl, on a large carved bed covered by a veil. The bed was covered with a soft blanket, and a white tiger was lying lazily on it. The white tiger's eyes were closed, and its soft and smooth white fur emitted a soft glow under the night-luminescent pearl. Except for several black cloud patterns on its forehead and back, its entire body was white. Its 2 front paws were crossed in front of its body, and its chin was resting on them. Its semicircular ears drooped slightly, and its furry claws were retracted into sharp claws. It looked quite harmless. Its abdomen, which was also covered with a thick layer of soft fur, was slowly rising and falling with its breathing. Is it asleep? She suddenly came back to her senses. Meng Qi. Meng Qi. She loosened her grip, and the cool veil slipped from her hand, gently brushing against her cheek. It covered the large bed again, and also covered the huge white tiger that seemed to be in a deep sleep. Meng Qi was in a daze, and suddenly staggered back a few steps. She reached out and rubbed her eyes. Just now, did she see wrongly? Yes. She must have seen wrongly. She suddenly fell into the starfall sea, was frightened, and then little Qi went missing. She was too panicked, too worried about little Qi. 1200 KSW net. Meng Qi subconsciously swallowed. Faintly, a somewhat scary thought flashed through her mind. The thought flashed through her mind so quickly that she couldn't catch it, and she didn't dare to catch it. Yes, that must be it. She must have seen wrongly, right? Meng Qi slowly took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. The light of the night-luminescent pearl shone on the veil, and she could still see the black shadow inside. Is he okay? After the initial shock, Meng Qi suddenly came back to her senses. If he was just asleep, he wouldn't have woken up when she knocked on the door, entered the room, and walked to the bed to lift the veil. She suddenly stepped forward and raised her hand. When her fingertips touched the veil, Meng Qi hesitated for a moment, and then decisively lifted the veil again. On the bed, the white tiger that was even taller and more slender than her was still lying there quietly. Ah! Meng Qi pursed his dry lips. Are you okay? She asked softly. The white tiger remained motionless. Even its ears did not react. You. Meng Qi looked at the huge creature in front of him that clearly looked like an adult white tiger. He carefully reached out his hand and gently pressed it on the other party's forehead. Her fingertips glowed slightly, and the fluorescent light illuminated the white tiger's fur even more clearly. Meng Qi exerted a little force with his fingers and pressed on the thick white fur that looked neat and soft. It felt so good. It turned out that the big white tiger was also very easy to touch. Meng Qi suddenly came back to his senses and closed his eyes. Just as her spiritual energy entered, it was as if it had sunk into an unfathomable abyss. Not only could she not feel anything, even the spiritual energy she sent in was instantly sucked away. Meng Qi took a deep breath and sent in a wisp of spiritual energy again. Similarly, as soon as the spiritual energy touched it, it was instantly sucked dry. She was stunned and opened her eyes to look at the white tiger. It was as if there was a bottomless abyss in the other party's body that could even devour spiritual energy. What was going on? Meng Qi was a little hesitant. The white tiger was still lying quietly on the bed. Even if she tossed and turned, it still did not wake up. Meng Qi stared at it for a while. At first glance, she felt that this white tiger was too big and too fierce. It was far less cute than the little white tiger, Little Qi. But after staring for a while, the other party's eyes were still closed. Its chin was obediently resting on its furry paws, and its two white, fluffy semicircular ears were slightly drooping. It seemed a little cute. Meng Qi thought for a while and took out a silver needle from her storage bag. This was the silver needle that she bought from the Cloud Immortal Pavilion. It was commonly used by medical cultivators for diagnosis. Of course, it was not as useful as Xue Chengshuan's natal magic treasure, but it was not bad for her now. She reached out and gently held the white tiger's paw. She held the other party's slightly cold paw in her palm, and then pinched the silver needle and pierced it. The tip of the needle flashed with a cold light. As soon as it touched the white tiger's paw, the white tiger, who had not moved for a long time, suddenly opened its eyes. There seemed to be stars flashing in its blue eyes, but they quickly disappeared into its cold eyes that were as deep as the night sky. Meng Qi did not have time to react at all. The paw that she carefully held in her palm suddenly turned over. She only felt a strong force on her shoulder. As the world spun, her back hit the soft quilt heavily. Meng Qi's chest sank. The white tiger's paw was already pressing her down on the bed. Meng Qi, she could not speak at all. The paw that was stepping on her exerted a little force, and all her unfinished words were blocked. Meng Qi subconsciously widened her eyes and looked up. She was instantly pressed down and could not breathe. The white tiger looked down at her condescendingly. Its eyes were cold, as if they were empty. There was not a trace of emotion that belonged to a living creature in them. But soon, the indifference was dispelled, and the pair of blue eyes gradually focused. Meng Qi only felt the paw stepping on her chest slowly weaken, and fresh air poured into her nose again. Cough, 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 cough. She coughed a few more times and struggled to speak. I just, cough, cough, cough. She was lying in the soft brocade quilt. Although the white tiger had relaxed its grip on her, it still pressed her down on the bed. It was as if it was warning Meng Qi that if she dared to struggle, it could take her life at any time. She stared unblinkingly at the white tiger on top of her, looking at the other party's eyes that were getting colder and colder. The soft white fur was in front of her eyes. When Meng Qi's breath brushed past, it could also make the white fur sway gently. She looked down at the paw pressing on her body. The semicircular paw was an enlarged version of Little Qi's paw. Meng Qi looked up at the white tiger in front of her. When Little Qi became an adult, it should also look like this, right? In an instant, countless thoughts surged into Meng Qi's mind like a tidal wave. Chu Tianfeng had shown her before. In the mirror image recorded in the spell, the one called True Lord White Tiger had the same magnificent beauty as her master. The demon cultivators of the Red Fox clan were inexplicably horrified when they saw the Four Extremes formation. Even Sikong Xing was so scared that he lost his fighting spirit and obediently bowed down to her to address her as Lord. The study of spell formations had long been lost in the 3,000 worlds. It was said that there were relatively complete inheritances in the demon realm and the devil realm that were passed down from the ancient times tens of thousands of years ago. And, this valiant, strong, and beautiful heavenly demon white tiger in front of her. This was definitely not the white tiger spirit beast of the 3,000 worlds. They were not that strong, and they would not have eyes that were far more beautiful and bright than the purest sapphires in the world. Qing Yan's Henjin? Meng Qi murmured and called out softly. The white tiger seemed to be stunned, and a complicated light flashed in his blue eyes. He slowly raised his paw. However, the moment he moved his paw, Meng Qi suddenly reached out and hugged his furry front paw tightly. Qing Yan's Henjin, she called out again, but this time, there was no hesitation or doubt in her voice. Instead, it became firm. The white tiger, it's really. Meng Qi buried her head in the thick white fur on his chest and hugged his paw tightly. Sob. Is it really Qingyan's Henjin? She choked with sobs. For some reason, she suddenly felt like crying. Her nose was sour, and her eyes were hot. She couldn't control her tears at all, and they fell down. Meng Qi's tears wet the white fur on the white tiger's chest. As if he was scalded, he quickly shrank back. Why is she crying again? Wasn't she fine just now? Why is she crying again? Sob, 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 sob. Meng Qi hugged the white tiger's furry paw and couldn't control her tears at all. She didn't think much of it before. Even if the other party descended from the sky and appeared in the Starfall Sea to save her. However, probably because she had been with the illusion array for a month in the barrier of the grand competition, Meng Qi always felt that it was unreal. Following him all the way to the vast wilderness, she also felt that every step was like stepping on clouds. She was floating and couldn't step on solid ground. She obediently followed him here. The reason why she felt conflicted about whether to leave or stay was mostly because she still felt that it was unreal. That feeling was as if she had stepped into another illusion array. Meng Qi had even been secretly looking for new floors that could allow her to see through this illusion array. Then, she realized that all of this was an illusion. Even if she went to the heavens beyond heaven and met her good friends, everyone would help her find a way to leave the Starfall Sea. There was still a voice in her heart that kept saying, "It's fake. It's all fake. You'll soon discover the truth, see through the illusion array, and wake up." Then, when she woke up from her dream, she would still be alone, and Yun Qingyang would still be on the horizon that she couldn't reach. But now, Meng Qi held the white tiger's paw tighter, and the soft white fur brushed against her palm. Not only did the other party tell her his name, but he even let her know his true identity. Did this mean that he wouldn't leave just like that? After saying goodbye, there would be no news of him from then on, and it would be a lifetime before they met again. Such a realistic touch made her slowly exhale. Her feet, which had been stepping on the clouds, finally stepped on solid ground. Sob. Meng Qi continued to sob softly. She pressed her forehead against the stiff white tiger's chest, and her tears fell even faster. The originally soft and smooth white fur on the white tiger's chest was messed up by her rubbing. Her tears condensed into puffs, and it looked rather pathetic. "Don't." The white tiger slowly raised its other paw that wasn't hugged by Meng Qi. It paused in the air for a long time before it slowly put down its paw as if it had made up its mind. It gently pressed on Meng Qi's thin shoulder. "Don't cry. Sob, 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 sob." "Yes." Meng Qi replied in a choked voice. She had always listened to Yun Qingyan's words and had never doubted it. Meng Qi immediately and slowly let go of the paw that she was hugging. She reluctantly stared at the paw that had been messed up by her. She took a deep breath and slowly sat up on her knees, placing her hands obediently on her knees. Meng Qi closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths before she managed to stop her tears from falling. She looked up. Her eyes, which had been washed by tears, were exceptionally bright. Her wet eyelashes made her look a little pitiful. Her eyes were red. The tip of her pretty nose was also red. The tears on her cheeks had yet to dry. She obediently knelt on the bed and quietly looked at the white tiger. The white tiger's paw that was stepping on the bed subconsciously tightened. He closed his eyes and ordered in a hoarse voice, "Close your eyes." "Oh." When Meng Qi spoke, her voice was still slightly nasal. She sounded a little aggrieved. However, she still closed her eyes as she was told. Her wet eyelashes drooped down and trembled slightly. She was like a butterfly whose wings were wet by the rain. She could only weakly lie in the palm of someone's hand and be at his mercy. The white tiger took a deep breath. For a moment, a tyrannical emotion that he had never felt before emerged from his heart. He wanted to do the same to her just now. He hurriedly stopped himself from continuing to think. The girl in the green robe in front of him was already obedient enough. The sky demon white tiger's slender and healthy figure suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the handsome man in the white robe lazily sat cross-legged in front of Meng Qi. Yun Qingyang said faintly, "It's done." Meng Qi opened her left eye a little and quietly looked at Yun Qingyang. Then, her eyes widened. Qing Yan's Henjin. As expected, he didn't intend to hide his identity in front of her at all. In an instant, Meng Qi felt as if she heard the spring breeze warming up and the sound of flowers blooming on the earth. She felt warm in her heart and looked at Yun Qingyang with sparkling eyes. Meng Qi immediately sat more upright on her knees and straightened her slightly thin back. Yes. Yun Qingyang responded vaguely. In fact, Meng Qi's eyes were like this every time she looked at him, as if there were little stars twinkling in her eyes. However, it was the first time he saw such a happy expression. Even her eyebrows and eyes were like a spring breeze. Was she so happy just because she saw his real body? Yun Qingyang recalled that Meng Qi didn't seem to have any resistance to furry animals. His face slowly turned cold. He brushed his sleeve and covered his right hand. It seemed that Meng Qi's tears were still on it, which made him a little impatient. Neither of them noticed that the distance between the two of them was almost ambiguous. No matter how big the bed in Yun Qingyang's room was, the two of them weren't far from each other. As long as he stretched out his hand, he could pull Meng Qi to him. Yun Qingyang naturally couldn't do that. His gaze gradually turned cold. Why are you looking for me? Meng Qi didn't sleep and came to his room. She must have encountered something. Meng Qi was about to say that she was fine when she suddenly remembered the purpose of her visit. Qing Yan's Henjin. She became anxious again. I picked up an injured young sky demon White tiger. Meng Qi stammered and glanced at Yun Qingyang carefully. Yun Qingyang, when it fell into the Starfall Sea, I checked it. It was still in the beast house in my storage bag. However, when I went back to my room to rest, little white tiger was no longer in the beast house. Meng Qi quickly said, Qingyan's Henjin, please help me find him. He should be a cub of your race. However, I don't know why he fell into the Trichilia chasm and was seriously injured. Sky Demon White Tiger. Yun Qingyang stared at Meng Qi. A cub? Yes. Meng Qi nodded. When she saw the big white tiger lying there earlier, she also wondered if it was little Qi. However, this thought only flashed through her mind. Meng Qi dismissed this idea first. Yun Qingyang could kill a Nirvana fierce eagle with a raise of her hand and almost took her life. How could he be that pitiful little white tiger that was so seriously injured that she couldn't do anything about and slept most of the day? So what if he's lost? Yun Qingyang lowered her eyes and said indifferently, why should we waste the effort to find him? No. Meng Qi raised her voice. Then, she suddenly realized that she was talking to Yun Qingyang. She quickly lowered her voice and explained softly, he's injured. If he's also in the Starfall Sea, he definitely won't survive. Oh. Yun Qingyang looked up slightly and looked at the green-robed girl kneeling in front of her. You care about him a lot. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. She suddenly blushed. In the beginning, she had only wanted to heal little Seven because of his strange and serious injuries. As a doctor, she had wanted to heal him. At that time, Chu Tianfeng showed her the mirror image of perfected Lord White Tiger. At that time, Meng Qi didn't know that the master she missed so much in her previous life was perfected Lord White Tiger. However, since he looked exactly like her master, she couldn't just leave little Qi in the lurch. Later, after spending so much time together, Meng Qi, who didn't have any resistance to cute fluffy animals, really liked this little guy. She really couldn't ignore his life and death now. If you care so much, you can find him yourself. Yun Qingyang said indifferently, you don't have to tell me. Huh? Meng Qi was stunned. Yun Qingyang didn't care. Wasn't little Qi also a heavenly demon white tiger? Did she make a mistake? It seemed, it wasn't impossible. At that time, Chu Tianfeng only told her, and she just listened. However, little Qi really looked like Yun Qingyang's real body. Her eyes, in particular, were as clear and beautiful as sapphires. What's wrong? Yun Qingyang looked at Meng Qi, who was staring blankly at her, and asked lazily, are you afraid of the Starfall Sea and don't dare to find him yourself? Yes. The girl in the green robe blushed again. She lowered her head, revealing the back of her fair and delicate neck. Qingyan's Henjin, can you help me find little Qi, the heavenly demon little white tiger? Meng Qi murmured. She rarely asked for help, let alone Yun Qingyang. Previously, she didn't ask him to leave the Starfall Sea. Instead, she chose to find a way herself. Now, for the sake of little Qi, Meng Qi couldn't care less anymore. As soon as she said that, her face burned even hotter. Her cheeks turned crimson, and her long eyelashes trembled nervously. Yun Qingyang raised his eyebrows and looked at Meng Qi. "You're begging me for him?" "Yes." Meng Qi's voice was even lower as she responded softly. She also felt that she was too thick-skinned. She didn't protect little Qi well, and now she had to beg Yun Qingyang to help. "Okay," Yun Qingyang said lightly. "Thank you, Qingyan's Henjin." Hearing this, Meng Qi raised her head and looked at him with unusual joy. She turned around and nimbly jumped off the bed. "Can we leave now?" "Meng Qi." Yun Qingyang also stood up. He took a step forward and stood in front of Meng Qi. "Why did you save him?" Yun Qingyang walked forward and asked casually, "You also said that he was a cub of my clan. It shouldn't have anything to do with you. When I picked him up, he was already injured." Meng Qi hurriedly caught up with him. She didn't expect Yun Qingyang to ask this and subconsciously added, "He was quite badly injured." At that time, she hesitated. Although she half-jokingly said that she didn't want to save him because he was a little male tiger, she would leave him alone. However, she knew that she would not leave him there. Otherwise, she would never be able to feel at ease. Because he was injured, you picked him up and wanted to save him. Huh? Yun Qingyang didn't stop walking. At this time, night had completely fallen around the Great Desolate Island. After the two of them left the manor, the surroundings were dark except for the starlight. It looked a little strange. "Yes," Meng Qi said. She couldn't tell Yun Qingyang the other reason. He didn't remember what she had experienced in her previous life. Meng Qi looked up at the other party's side profile. Yun Qingyang's perfect face was covered with a layer of soft starlight. Under the starry night, Meng Qi couldn't see his expression clearly and didn't know whether he was happy or angry. "Meng Qi." Yun Qingyang took another step forward. The Starfall Sea was already in front of them. The starlight in the sky above the Starfall Sea was getting brighter and brighter. It was reflected in the water and looked magnificent, mysterious, and beautiful. The Starfall Sea is an uncrossable creature. No one can come to the Great Desolate Island except on the one-leaf dream boat. Yun Qingyang reached out and pointed at the quiet Starfall Sea. He said slowly, "So when we crossed the sea and arrived here, your little white tiger was probably swallowed by the Starfall Sea and left inside." Meng Qi. She widened her eyes and looked at Yun Qingyang in disbelief. "After 24 hours, all the creatures that fall into the sea will be turned into the 5 spirit vital energy." Yun Qingyang continued, "It's less than 24 hours now. You still have a chance to save him." He waved his sleeve and the canoe that brought them to the Great Desolate Island drifted over and stopped on the shore. "If you want to save him, you have to go by yourself. This one-leaf dream boat can't carry a third person." Yun Qingyang said calmly, "But you have to think carefully. In another 2 hours, the Starfall Sea will explode and last for 24 hours. If you can't find him in 2 hours and can't return to the Great Desolate Island in time, you will also fall into the sea and be swallowed by the Starfall Sea. You will become one of the thousands of 5 spirit vital energy here." Yun Qingyang's eyes were as bright as stars. He looked into Meng Qi's eyes. "Do you want to go?" Meng Qi. Meng Qi took a deep breath and turned her head to look at the vast and boundless Starfall Sea. She probably wouldn't even be able to search through a small area of the Starfall Sea in 2 hours. If she couldn't come back, she would also fall into the sea. There were only 2 hours. Meng Qi gritted her teeth and jumped onto the one-leaf dream boat. "Qingyan's Henjin." She asked clearly, "Do you have a paddle?" Meng Qi knew that she couldn't be like Yun Qingyang and make the boat as obedient as the wind in the Starfall Sea. But she still had to give it a try. She could first search along the way she came. Maybe little Qi was waiting for her to save him on the way here. Yun Qingyang didn't say anything. He stood tall and quietly on the shore, looking deeply at Meng Qi. "Do you really want to go?" he asked slowly. "I have to try." Meng Qi raised her eyebrows. There are still 2 hours, right? Okay. Yun Qingyang flicked his sleeves. The boat didn't move. A soft wind suddenly wrapped around Meng Qi's waist and rolled her back to his side. At that time, little Qi was so badly injured that she remembered that his spiritual ocean was almost torn into pieces. She couldn't see the formed spiritual ocean in his body at all. It was also because of this that she thought that the little white tiger was a cub. Meng Qi once heard Su Junmo nag that the spiritual ocean of a heavenly demon was somewhat different from the spiritual ocean of cultivators from the 3,000 worlds. Once they reached adulthood, they would be as tough as leather. No matter how badly injured they were, it was very rare for their entire spiritual ocean to completely fall apart like cultivators. Once the spiritual ocean of cultivators from the 3,000 worlds fell apart, their cultivation would be reduced to nothing. Unless a heaven realm medical cultivator helped, there was no possibility of recovery. Demon cultivators were different. The spiritual ocean of an adult demon cultivator was extremely difficult to tear apart. At that time, Su Junmo was so badly injured that his entire spiritual ocean was almost occupied by the divine devouring vine, but his spiritual ocean was not damaged at all. After Meng Qi cured him, he also recovered very quickly. However, that day, Meng Qi really didn't find the existence of a spiritual ocean in the little white tiger's body. That was why she thought that he was still a cub heavenly demon white tiger. What about now? Had Yun Qingyan's spiritual ocean been repaired? He said that he was fine for the time being. Was he like Ji Wujiang, who was sometimes strong and sometimes weak because of his spiritual ocean? She pursed her lips. An injury to one's spiritual ocean was extremely serious for any cultivator from any world. Even if he had enough starlight, it wouldn't be possible to repair it in a short period of time. Could she ask? Meng Qi hesitated, but she had to mention what happened back then again. Her face burned again. Why don't we just forget about it today? Tomorrow. When the atmosphere was not so awkward tomorrow, everyone might forget about what happened tonight. Yes. She would ask tomorrow. Yun Qingyang did not move. He looked around and said to Meng Qi, "You can start refining the 5-spirit cauldron." He pondered for a moment and said, "There are 2 materials that are extremely rare in the 3,000 worlds. You fell into the Starfall Sea by chance. You are quite lucky." Meng Qi wanted to cry. He even knew about the 5-spirit cauldron and that she was short of materials. What was the difference between Yun Qingyang admitting that he was little Qi? She regretted it so much. Why did she act smart and ask Yun Qingyang that question? Boo-hoo, what did she do to little Qi? Meng Qi did not dare to think about it. Anyway, it was. She had committed a heinous crime. The Starfall Sea is full of the 5-spirit primordial Qi. Yun Qingyang continued, "It is the best place to refine the 5-spirit cauldron." He finally turned around and walked forward. Meng Qi didn't even dare to raise her head. She obediently lowered her head and followed behind him, slowly moving forward. In the ancient times tens of thousands of years ago, although the 5-spirit primordial Qi was not common, it could be found in several places. "Your senior Lin Yang." Yun Qingyan's eyes flashed with hostility. When she thought of Lin Yang, it was hard not to think of Ji Wujiang. The extreme and evil black-robed young man had once fought side by side with Meng Qi. In the end, she willingly stayed to live and die with him. The friendship cultivated like this was obviously different from other people's. Yes. Meng Qi's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. The era when she grew up is a little different from now. The 5-spirit cauldron is her natal magic treasure. She generously gave it to you, but you did not acknowledge her as your master. Do you regret it? Yun Qingyang asked. I don't regret it. Meng Qi was still very firm when it came to this matter. I will inherit senior Lin Yang's will. In the future, whether it is the 5-spirit cauldron or the medical skills and spells she passed on to me, I will find the most suitable successor for her. But I don't regret it, she added. Meng Qi's words were firm, but when she thought of the things she had done to the little white tiger, she felt that her future was bleak. In her previous life, she was very respectful and had never done anything to make Yun Qingyang unhappy. In the end, she did not receive her approval and was barred from the sect. Sigh, Meng Qi sighed softly in her heart. Now, she could only take one step at a time. No matter what, she was better than in her previous life after this reunion. She was no longer a weak foundation establishment cultivator. When Meng Qi thought of this, she could not help but secretly look up and secretly glance at Yun Qingyang. The other party's expression was calm, and she could not tell if she was happy or angry. As if sensing her gaze, Yun Qingyang glanced at her. Meng Qi. She quickly retracted her gaze and continued to look down obediently. From the corner of her eye, she could only see Yun Qingyang's white robe fluttering lightly. Do you know the origin of the 5 spirit cauldrons name? Yun Qingyang asked again. Yes. The book on refining the 5 spirit cauldrons states that the elixirs can be changed into the 5 elements according to one's needs, Meng Qi said. This way, even the same elixir can be refined into different elements. That's right, Yun Qingyang said. After one's cultivation level increases, even spirit energy can be refined into the 5 spirit vital energy. Yes. Why can starlight repair the spiritual sea? Yun Qingyang continued. It can be used to refine spirit energy into the 5 spirit vital energy and accumulate it in stardust. Meng Qi was stunned for a moment, and a faint idea emerged in her mind. She subconsciously turned her head and looked at the starfall sea around the great desolate island. Could it be that this place, whether it's demon cultivators, fiendish cultivators, or human cultivators in the 3 realms, when their spiritual sea is damaged, they can only rely on the 5 spirit vital energy to repair it, Yun Qingyang continued, which is starlight. Meng Qi was stunned again. She was still looking at the starfall sea. Yun Qingyang said that the starfall sea was filled with the 5 spirit vital energy. Didn't that mean? Meng Qi suddenly turned her head and looked at Yun Qingyang excitedly. Qingyang's Henjin, there's so much 5 spirit vital energy in the starfall sea. Doesn't that mean that no matter how damaged one's spiritual sea is, as long as one can enter this place, they can be repaired? Her eyes were bright and full of excitement. Even the awkwardness just now was temporarily forgotten. Yun Qingyang looked at her deeply. The faint smile in his eyes slowly froze. Meng Qi soon couldn't bear his gaze. She quickly turned her head and muttered as if she was talking to herself. Is it more useful than starlight? Yun Qingyang looked at her quietly. Did Meng Qi want to save Ji Wujiang? His voice gradually turned cold. It's more useful than starlight, but you need to be alive to get here. You also need to be able to withstand the violent power of the starfall sea, which is enough to destroy the world. Heh! Meng Qi frowned. Qingyang's Henjin, is there nothing you can do? What do you think the one-leaf dreamboat is used for? Yun Qingyang said indifferently. Meng Qi didn't notice the change in his tone. She turned her head and looked at the starfall sea. Under the starry sky, the calm surface of the sea reflected the stars in the sky. At this time, the starfall sea was really as beautiful as the world of immortals. One couldn't imagine the terrible power contained in it. It seemed that this was the only way. Meng Qi nodded vigorously. She directly took out the bamboo slip that recorded the refining method of the 5 spirit cauldron from her storage bag. Qingyang's Henjin, I've formed my gold core now. I'm going to start refining the 5 spirit cauldron. In fact, Meng Qi was still a little hesitant about whether she should use the 5 spirit cauldron as her natal magic weapon or not. Meng Qi felt that a natal magic weapon like Shui Chengxian was also very useful. Among the medical cultivators in the Trichilia Chasm, there were many who chose silver needles as their natal magic weapon. After the diagnosis, it was the treatment. If one couldn't even figure out what the other party's problem was, it was sometimes difficult to change one's fate no matter how powerful the medicinal pills were. She was very happy after getting the 5 spirit cauldron. Ji Wujiang also said that it would be very powerful if she used it as her natal magic weapon. Meng Qi was still a little hesitant. For her, the medicinal cauldron she bought was enough. At worst, She could buy a better medicinal cauldron when her cultivation level was higher in the future. But now, her last trace of doubt was completely dispelled. Meng Qi said again, "Qingyan's Henjin, please guide me. Where can I find the heavenly materials and earthly treasures to refine the 5-spirit cauldron in the Starfall Sea?" As she spoke, she bowed respectfully to Yun Qingyang. "Thank you, Qingyan's Henjin." Yun Qingyan's eyes flashed slightly, and it was even colder than before. "You want to refine the 5-spirit cauldron?" He had taken the initiative to propose this. Otherwise, the other party might not have thought of it. However, when he thought about it, Meng Qi didn't seem to have planned to refine the 5-spirit cauldron so early. Now that he understood the 5-spirit cauldron and the use of the 5-spirit primordial energy, he immediately became impatient. To save Ji Wujiang? Yun Qingyan's eyelashes drooped, covering the light in his eyes. His gaze became dark, and his voice became slightly hoarse. It should be recorded on the bamboo slip that refining the 5-spirit cauldron requires 5 pure 5-elements materials. "Yes," Meng Qi said. She held the bamboo slip with both hands and respectfully handed it to Yun Qingyang. "Qingyan's Henjin, please take a look." "No need." Yun Qingyang flicked his sleeve and rejected Meng Qi. Meng Qi didn't hide anything from him, and her completely unguarded attitude made him feel a little better. However, as soon as he thought that this was for Ji Wujiang, his gaze became more and more serene. "You've seen Jiyu before," Yun Qingyang said. "The Sky Dragon Crystal, which represents water, and the Chaos Vine, which represents wood, can only be found in the Demon Realm and the Devil Realm, respectively, but they can be bought in the Outland." Yes. Meng Qi had never heard of these two things. They were probably expensive in the Outland, and he didn't know if he had enough spirit stones. The remaining Brahma sand and nether iron can only be found in the Starfall Sea, Yun Qingyang said. The 5-spirit cauldron needs these 5 materials of the 5 elements to be successfully refined, but you don't need to find all 5 materials to start refining, Yun Qingyang said. Yes. Meng Qi held the bamboo slip and nodded. It's also recorded that you can start refining with just 1 material. Every time you find a material, you can improve by 1 realm. Therefore, when the 5-spirit cauldron is completed, it's already a 6th realm natal magic weapon. Cultivators started from Qi refining, gold core, nascent soul, spirit severing, insightful emptiness. Insightful emptiness was the 6th realm, and once the 5-spirit cauldron was completed, it was equivalent to a magic weapon refined by an insightful emptiness cultivator. Moreover, cultivators who used natal magic weapons were not limited by their own realms. In other words, if Meng Qi could find 5 heavenly materials and produce treasures and refine the 5-spirit cauldron, then she would have a 6th realm magic weapon that only insightful emptiness cultivators could have. She could even directly refine a 6th realm elixir that could be used by insightful emptiness cultivators. With the help of the Grand Fire Formation, she could refine a 7th realm elixir that only insightful emptiness cultivators could use. Of course, Meng Qi also knew that it would be difficult to find these 5 heavenly materials and produce treasures. She might not even be able to find 3 of them when she reached the insightful emptiness stage. This was also one of the reasons why she was hesitant to use the 5-spirit cauldron as her natal magic weapon. Because the materials were too rare. For example, if Yun Qingyang didn't say anything, Meng Qi had never heard of Ming Tai and Fan Shuo, so she didn't know where to find them. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Yun Qingyang turned around. "Now, go back and rest." His voice was a bit cold, and he left with a flick of his sleeve. Meng Qi didn't think much of it. Yun Qingyang was only fine for the time being. His words also meant to tell her that he hadn't recovered from his injuries. On the way back to the manor, Meng Qi couldn't help but glance at him from time to time. Even when she lay on the bed in her room again, she still felt that it was a bit unreal. Too many things had happened today. Meng Qi widened her eyes and looked at the light muslin bed curtain in the darkness. She saw Yun Qingyang's real body and then realized that he was actually. Meng Qi turned over and buried her head in the blanket. As long as this thought flashed through her mind, she felt extremely ashamed. She seemed to have rubbed her head, and pinched her claws, and her ears, and her chin. Meng Qi reached out and quickly knocked her head several times. Why couldn't she control herself back then? Even if it was a young sky demon white tiger, it was still a great sky demon, a royal sky demon. She closed her eyes, and the little white tiger's cute appearance appeared in her mind again. Azure blue eyes, fluffy semicircular ears, round little claws, soft and clean white fur. Mengqi clenched and relaxed her fingers. Stroking the little white tiger felt good for a moment, but it was really good to stroke. She hugged the blanket and rolled a few more times on the bed. It was rare for Mengqi to be unable to fall asleep. Whenever she closed her eyes, other than the little white tiger, she would see Yun Qingyan's deep eyes looking at her with a faint smile. What a sin! Mengqi rolled a few more times. She had committed such a heinous and rebellious act. She still hoped that Master would accept her as his disciple in this lifetime. It was probably the last bit of kindness that Yun Qingyang had shown by not throwing her into the Starfall Sea directly. In the end, Mengqi didn't even know when she fell asleep. When she woke up, the room was still a little dark, but there was still a faint light shining in through the window. Mengqi opened her eyes and looked at the muslin bed curtain above her in a daze. The memories of last night flooded her mind again. She sat up abruptly and quickly jumped off the bed. As she put on her shoes and walked out quickly, she used a simple spell to summon water and freshen up. Ah! Mengqi couldn't help but exclaim softly as soon as she opened the door. In the sky, the morning sun had already risen, and the soft rays of sunlight shone down. However, she could still see the twinkling stars in the sky. Although they were far from being as bright as at night, they could still be seen clearly, and their brilliance wasn't obscured by the sunlight at all. Mengqi stared blankly for a moment. So the Starfall Sea was this strange. The sky wasn't the usual sky blue of the three realms. Instead, it was a little like a large piece of clear light jade, similar to the color of the Star Lake in Starfall Valley. Looking at it like this, the entire sky seemed beautiful and a little strange. Yun Qingyan's door also opened with a creak. The white-robed man stood tall. "You're awake." Qingyan's Henjin. Mengqi blushed when she saw him now. She lowered her head, not daring to meet his gaze. She murmured, "Morning." "Come with me," Yun Qingyang said, taking the lead to walk forward. Mengqi hurriedly followed. The two of them left the manor and walked to the other end of the great desolate island. Mengqi followed closely behind him and did not ask where they were going. The Starfall Sea looked even more charming during the day than at night. The sunlight shone on the surface of the sea as if it was sprinkling a handful of gold fragments. The tiny waves sparkled with golden light, no different from the lakes in the three realms. However, the reflections of the stars could still be seen in the sea. They walked for about half an hour and arrived at the southernmost part of the great desolate island. This was a crescent-shaped promontory, and the waves were bigger than other places. A mountain stood on the promontory. There were no plants on the rugged mountain. It was bare and looked a little strange. "This is?" Mengqi asked as he looked at Yun Qingyang. "You can find nether iron here," Yun Qingyang said. "Besides." Before he finished speaking, his gaze moved slightly as he looked up the mountain. Mengqi followed his gaze and looked over. There, she focused her gaze. There seems to be someone there. Yun Qingyan's face is green, or she couldn't control herself at all when she saw the difficult and complicated diseases. "Oh, my eyes hurt yesterday, so I had to ask for leave. I've made everyone wait for a long time then. I found out today that I'm only 1 meter away from the season list. I'm excited. This is the first time I'm so close to the season list. Can my babies send me up there? Even if it's just for a day, I'll be satisfied. But this requires the support of everyone's comments. Little angels, please work hard and comment more, okay? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.